Chapter 556. Charles took off his mechanical helmet. He was drenched in cold sweat, his bangs stuck to his forehead, and his hands on the armrest of the wheelchair were tightly clenched into fists. He was obviously in a state of high tension. Just now, even the system of the brain expansion machine was a little unstable. Just like when you detected and traced teacher Caesar's consciousness, the feedback signal exceeded the limit value that this machine could withstand. Hank swallowed his saliva in shock and uncertainty. He held Charles's back and couldn't help but ask, "Professor Charles, what did you see just now? A person?" Charles took a few deep breaths to calm the horror in his heart. Only then did he organize his words and said, "Yes. A powerful mutant that I have never seen before. He is very similar to Caesar's existence halo, but also very different. If Caesar's halo is like the sun, bright and warm, I saw that person's consciousness halo was like a black hole, cold and dark, about to absorb my consciousness." "Who is that?" Azazo narrowed his eyes. "There was actually someone as strong as Caesar?" "I didn't see clearly." Charles shook his head and said in shock, "He wants to destroy the world." This idea was not concealed at all and was completely exposed outside his halo. I didn't dare to probe too close. Just before I took off my helmet, he seemed to have noticed that I was spying on him. Hank couldn't help but sigh. The Sentinel matter hasn't been solved yet, and there's another powerful mutant that wants to destroy the world? This world is really full of disasters. There's no time to complain. Charles frowned and pondered. I just saw that Eric was near the New Jersey train station. There are many secret military bases around there, and it's also the only way for trains to move important military weapons and equipment. I suspect that Eric wants to destroy or control the Sentinel weapons researched by the U.S. This is completely his style. Hank said helplessly, "Unfortunately, Rui-1 is still unconscious. Someone must stay to protect her. Professor Charles, it's best that you stay, but Azazo and I alone are not enough to stop Eric." Charles nodded and said firmly, "So, we need to find help, enough help." Late that night, near the New Jersey train station, a train carrying military equipment whizzed past at high speed on the tracks of a circular mountain road. Eric, who had been waiting for a long time, suddenly appeared from the side of the mountain. He jumped down and landed steadily on the roof of the train. "Who?" Eric maintained his balance and stood up. He looked at the rows of closed carriages below and grabbed his open hands bit by bit. "Caw caw caw," the steel bulletproof carriage groaned. The screws bounced off, and the steel bars twisted and broke. A large part of the roof at the back of the train was directly lifted off. Eric's veins bulged, and he drove the magnetic field to lift the roof of the car and throw it to the cliff outside the tracks. Without the cover of the roof, the contents of the carriage were clear at a glance. They were silver robots that were 2 meters tall. Although they were mechanical objects, they exuded an aura that made the mutants feel suffocated. They were lined up neatly in the carriage. "This is a Sentinel?" Eric's eyes were full of splendor. If he could control the Sentinel Legion, it would not be difficult to take care of the superpowers and create a world that belonged to the mutants. Just as Eric was about to move the Sentinels away, a red flame suddenly glowed behind him. He looked back vigilantly and saw several people wearing X-Men uniforms appear on the roof of the train. "You are," Eric's pupils contracted slightly. They were basically acquaintances from before. The first was Hank, who had turned into a blue-haired orc. The second was Logan with his hair blown up. The third was Azazo, who had teleported them here. The fourth was a tall young man with an opening in the chest of his battle suit. He was the strongest student of the first batch of prodigies, Shockwave Alex Summers. "Eric, stop what you are doing." Logan took the lead and took a step forward. He was Logan from the future. His consciousness finally covered the original body of the current era, which made him feel extremely comfortable. "Oh. You are indeed different from before." Eric seemed to have sensed something. He raised his hand, and Logan, who was in front of him, was sent flying. He rolled a few times on the high-speed train, and in the end, he extended 3 sharp steel claws and stabbed them into the outer shell of the train to stop. The other 3 were speechless. This was not cool for more than 3 seconds. F***, I almost forgot. Logan cursed. He just remembered that his body was injected with adamantium in advance, and the bones in his body were no longer bones. His strength had greatly increased, but this body was easier to deal with than Garfield in front of Eric. Let me see. Caesar, what did he teach you? Eric flipped his hands and a large iron plate immediately smashed toward them. Let me. Alex took a step forward and stood in front of everyone. He puffed out his chest and a red energy beam shot out from his body, instantly penetrating and melting the iron plate that was smashing towards him. The energy beam continued to move forward, forcing Eric to dodge to the side. It's now. Hank had been holding Azazo's hand. After his reminder, Azazo used his ability and disappeared from Alex's back. The next moment, the red flame behind Eric glowed, and Hank rushed out from it. His strong hand strangled Eric's neck and pressed him against the roof of the train. Damn it! Eric raised his hand and tried to control the sentinel. As a result, Alex walked in front of him and aimed his chest at him. Stop, don't force me. Logan stood up again and stepped forward. He said in a deep voice, Eric, you can't win. You can't win because you're only one person. We're a team. Are you just going to let them make the Sentinel? The Sentinel is a weapon to destroy us in the future. Eric's eyes were bloodshot. His hands clenched into fists and punched the roof of the train. He gave up the meaningless struggle. In the face of 4 experienced mutants, there was a limit even if he was strong. Logan shook his head and said, of course we won't ignore the future. It's just that violence can never solve the real problem. Eric's face was cold and he didn't speak. Hank suggested, let's take him back to the professor. I'll take care of the aftermath. Okay. Azazo nodded and put his hand on Eric. But before he could teleport away, a purple flame suddenly glowed on the top of the train, and several mysterious people stepped out from it. Found it. The mysterious leader looked at Eric, who was subdued by the crowd, and said calmly, the 4th night. My child. Chapter 557. On the roof of the high-speed train that was circling the mountain road. The X-Men team that subdued Eric was tense and vigilant as they looked at the sudden appearance of Apocalypse and the others. They didn't know where the other party came from and what their intentions were. The middle-aged man in the lead was tall and broad, with a strange appearance and a mysterious black and gray cloak. Among them were 2 young women, a ponytailed girl in a non-mainstream dress, a dignified and beautiful Asian woman, and a white young man with steel wings and cold eyes. It was the revived Apocalypse and the 3 knights he selected from the world, Stormwind, Spirit Butterfly, and the Archangel. With the awakening buff granted by Apocalypse, the 3 mutants were surrounded by an extremely powerful aura. Be careful, I can feel that he is extremely dangerous and not on the same level as the previous enemies. Logan's hair stood on end as he clenched his fists and stretched out 3 steel blades. He took the initiative to block in front of everyone. I will cover your retreat. You came from that place, don't you know who he is? Hank still held Eric tightly and asked Logan. I don't know. Logan shook his head and looked directly at Apocalypse. He whispered solemnly, I have never seen him. If there was such a strong enemy in this era, the professor should have reminded me. Who cares about them? Alex stepped forward domineeringly and asked Apocalypse and the others, who are you and what are you doing here? I'm not here for you, but for him. Apocalypse's eyes drooped as he stretched out a finger and pointed at Eric who was being rubbed under Hank's body. Sorry, he is ours. Alex spread out his hands as he accumulated energy in front of his chest and was ready to fight at any time. Have I become a target? Eric couldn't help but complain. He was also secretly observing both sides. He thought it was the Mutants' Brotherhood, but he didn't know any of them and didn't know why they were looking for him. Hank gave Azazo a look and said in a low voice, "Azazo, these people are not easy to deal with. Take Eric back to the professor first and then come back to help us." "Understood." Azazo nodded seriously and placed his hand on Eric's shoulder. As if sensing their intentions, Tian-Chi tilted his head slightly and observed Azazo's small movements. His deep eyes suddenly glowed with a bright light. Azo used his ability and wanted to take Eric away, but he was soon stunned. His expression changed drastically. "What's going on? I can't teleport away. It's as if there's an unknown domain here that's blocking my teleportation path. This is the first time I've encountered such a situation. Can't teleport away?" Hank's eyes widened in surprise. Logan and Alex turned their gazes to Apocalypse and the others. For such a strange phenomenon to occur, it could only be due to the other party's ability. Lady Stormsword raised her chin and said proudly, "Of course. The one in front of you is a supreme god. Then don't blame me." Alex followed the idea of striking first to gain the upper hand. He abruptly thrust his chest forward, and a scorching crimson energy beam shot out from his body toward Tian-Chi and the others. In an instant, the mountain range and wilderness at night were illuminated with incomparable brightness. The Archangel and the other two knights did not intend to dodge. They still stood in place and watched the powerful energy beam approach. Just before the energy beam fell, Apocalypse waved her hand gently, and under the astonished eyes of the X-Men team, the red energy beam was blocked by a more powerful energy and refracted slightly off its original trajectory. The energy beam blasted on the mountain next to the railway, and gravel and soil splashed everywhere, bursting into a raging mountain fire. Logan also moved forward at the same time, but he was only halfway there when he was restrained by Tian-Chi's palm. The steel roof of the train seemed to turn into a quagmire, sinking his entire body into it. No matter how hard he struggled, he could not move. "You bastard!" Alex gritted his teeth and wanted to relaunch the energy beam, but with a light movement of Tian-Chi's palm, he was swatted away like a fly. And next to the high-speed train was a cliff. "Alex!" At the critical moment, Hank let go of Eric, jumped, and caught Alex in the air. The two hugged each other and rolled down the cliff. Instant kill. It was a real instant kill. Against the experienced X-Men team, almost all members were defeated in just 5 seconds. And the only one who really made a move was Tian-Chi. Logan. Hank. Alex. Azo's body trembled, but the space was locked and he could not use his teleportation ability. No matter how anxious he was, there was nothing he could do. Ahem. Eric coughed a few times, touched his neck, stood up from the top of the train, looked at Tian-Chi solemnly and asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Tian-Chi replied with an infectious voice, "There is no need for the current superpower to exist. Since I have recovered, I must become an immortal. Child, you are the best candidate for the 4th night." Night? Although Eric was puzzled, he still walked towards Tian-Chi. "Yes, Knight. Child, you have great potential, but it is not fully awakened. Let me help you." Tian-Chi nodded, and in order to express his sincerity, he reached out his hand and grabbed at Eric. Eric felt the blood in his body, and even his genes, become restless at this moment. His knees went soft and he knelt on the ground, screaming in extreme pain. Remember the emotions of anger, and when you were a child, when you first awakened your ability. Tian-Chi gave the buff to Eric and whispered to guide him. Kneeling on the train, Eric's face was ferocious, and his veins were bulging like dragons and snakes. He struggled and firmly spread out his palm. "Yes, that's it." Tian-Chi continued to guide him. "Ah!" Eric shouted to vent his anger. Woo-woo, the train that everyone was on trembled violently, and then it left the tracks and carried everyone suspended in the air. Then, under the traction of a strong magnetic field, the tracks within a kilometer began to collapse, and several mountains collapsed with a rumble. Countless gravel and dust flew up. This scene could be called a scene of the end of the world. God, he's amazing! The archangel could not help but exclaim. She finally understood why Tian Qi was so determined to recruit Eric. Magneto lived up to his name. On the other side, on a sunny southern island, Caesar and Jean sat on a reef, one big and one small, each holding a bamboo pole. Apparently, they were fishing leisurely by the sea. Teacher. Jean's little hand holding the bamboo pole trembled. What's wrong? Did you catch any fish? Caesar asked with a yawn. No. Jean shook her head and said in confusion, but I vaguely heard some cries. I don't know where they came from. Oh. Finally willing to show up. Caesar's eyes flashed. He muttered in a low voice, and then reached out to rub Jean's little head. Don't think about slacking off. Continue fishing until you catch 3. Otherwise, let alone training, the fish we catch won't be enough for you to eat. Yes. Jean pouted, feeling wronged, and continued to fish calmly. Chapter 558. Rumble. The train fell back onto the tracks, gravel rained down, and dust flew all over the mountains. Magneto Eric calmed down and slowly stood up from the ground. He bowed his head respectfully to Apocalypse and said, Who are you? Apocalypse, just add me, Master Apocalypse. Apocalypse said calmly. Yes, Master Apocalypse. Eric nodded. This was the second time he was impressed by someone. The last time was Caesar. Let's go, my 4 knights. Apocalypse waved his hand gently and opened the purple portal. He glanced at Logan and Azatso who were still on the train and said to Eric, I'll leave them to you. After that, he took the other 3 knights and stepped into the portal. Eric looked at Logan and Azatso and raised his hands. Logan and Azatso thought that Eric wanted to deal with them, but Eric's target was only the Sentinel prototype on the train. Under the control of the enhanced magnetic field, hundreds of Sentinels flew out of the train. Take care of yourselves, Eric said coldly as he carried the Sentinel and entered the purple portal with him. After the purple portal disappeared, only the collapsed mountain, the tracks, and the abandoned train were left. Ha! Logan cut the iron plate that bound him with his iron claws. With a burst of sparks, he struggled to stand up on the roof of the train. Logan, I can't save Hank and the others. Azatso knelt on the ground and hit the train with his fist. Logan looked down at him and sighed. It's not your fault. Those people are too strong. Not only did we not subdue Eric, but we also lost Hank and Alex. How are we going to explain this to the professor? Azatso and Logan were silent. Just as they were grieving, a blue flame shone from the top of the train and 3 figures appeared from the flame. Huh? Azatso and Logan looked over in shock. 2 of the 3 people were Hank and Alex, who had just fallen off the cliff. They were being supported by a blue-skinned, sharp-eared mutant with a tail. Are you guys all right? Azo quickly got up and exclaimed in surprise. We almost fell to our deaths. It was this friend who saved our lives. Hank let out a sigh of relief and patted the mutated youth's shoulder. Alex also said gratefully, Thank you, we owe you our lives. You're welcome. The young man was flattered and said, My name is Nightwalker. Ruiwen asked me to come. I am her friend. She saved my life once. Logan raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, Wait, Nightwalker, what's your ability? Teleportation, of course. Nightwalker scratched his head and replied. The others all looked at Azo with strange gazes. In any case, the 2 have similar sharp ears and tails and almost identical abilities. No matter how you look at it, they are inextricably linked. What are you looking at me for? I'm not messing around. Azo was a little guilty and glared at them. He returned to the topic and said, let's think about what to do first. Eric left with the Sentinels and suspected to have joined the team led by Apocalypse. You saw it just now. With the super strength of those people, they may really be able to destroy the world. Hank suggested, let's go back to school and see what the professor has to deal with it. In the dead of night, the moonlight fell on the teaching building of the Gifted Youth Academy. At this time, the hall on the third floor was very lively. Charles was sitting in a wheelchair near the window. In front of him were the returning X-Men, as well as the revived Rui 1 and the newly joined Nightwalker. When the X-Men team returned, they told Charles everything about Apocalypse. Charles fell into deep thought and said, "It can't be wrong. Tian-Chi should be the person whose consciousness halo was like a black hole. In fact, after you set off, Agent Mora of the CIA called me. She said that Apocalypse was the first mutant 10,000 years ago and the god who ruled the world of the old era. He once had the powerful Four Horsemen under him, and he himself had the mutant ability to deprive others of their abilities." Hank said solemnly, "Then what is his purpose for coming to this world again?" "I don't know, there is too much missing information." Charles thought for a moment and made a choice, "I have to use the brain expansion machine again." In the basement of the teaching building, in the brain expansion machine room. Under the gaze of Rui 1 and others behind him, Charles put on the mechanical helmet again and expanded his telepathy. After a while, he found his target, Magneto Eric. Although he was already familiar with the consciousness of this friend and foe, Charles was still shocked this time. Eric's consciousness halo was more than 3 times stronger than before. "Eric." Charles tried to call with his mind. "Charles?" In front of a burning stove in a house somewhere, Eric faced the wall and responded to the sudden call in his brain with his mind as usual. Charles said, "The man called Apocalypse is very dangerous. The Eric I know shouldn't be used by someone like him who calls himself a god." Eric said, "He gave me the power I wanted, the power to subvert this world, and I'm no longer the Eric you know." While Eric and Charles were communicating with their minds, Apocalypse, who was also in the room, looked at Eric, his eyes flashing with white light. "Oh my God, there is such a wonderful ability." "Sir Apocalypse, what did you see?" asked the Archangel. Apocalypse didn't speak, the white light in his eyes grew stronger. At the same time, Charles, who was talking to Eric in the basement, suddenly trembled, his eyes flashing with a strange white light, and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the opportunity to connect to your brain. This way, it's much simpler." Apocalypse remotely controlled Charles's brain, his consciousness covering the whole world, and directed at the military personnel in the superpower who held the nuclear missile key, controlling them to issue a consciousness command. "Launch nuclear missiles into the sky immediately." At this moment, all the personnel in the New York military base stood up and looked at the control center screen in horror. A horrifying feedback message came from it. The United States, Germany, Russia, and other places have launched nuclear missiles at the same time. Where is the target? The officer asked with a dry mouth. "In the sky. All nuclear missiles, launch into the sky." That night, countless people saw the nuclear missiles that symbolized the Grim Reaper being launched into the night sky. There is no need for a superpower to exist, everything should be turned to ashes, and then a new mutated civilization will be built on this foundation. Apocalypse raised his hands, and the hundreds and thousands of nuclear missiles that flew into near space slightly changed their direction, aiming their warheads at the blue Earth below. The moment Apocalypse controlled the nuclear missiles to bombard the Earth, a huge hole was blasted in the roof of the house he was in. A tall figure fell from the sky into the room, landing right in front of Apocalypse. Chapter 559. This scene was like a meteor. The 3-story villa continued to break down layer by layer from the roof until the hall on the first floor. The moment the tall figure landed on the ground, the floor suddenly cracked like a spider web, the broken tiles were thrown up, and the dust was swept out by the air wave. The air wave blew the clothes of several people in the house. The 4 knights, including Magneto, squatted down to reduce the impact pressure. Their hands were in front of them, and they could barely open their eyes for a moment. What is that? The archangel unfolded his metal wings in surprise and flapped them hard to offset the falling air wave. The dust in the house gradually recovered its visibility. Under the hole in the roof, above the hole, stood a blond boy in beach pants and casual clothes. His eyes were bright like stars, and he stood calmly about 3 meters in front of Apocalypse. He is? The other 3 knights only felt that he looked familiar, as if they had seen him somewhere before. Only Magneto Eric trembled and blurted out, "Caesar?" "Oh, you're here too, Eric." Caesar greeted Eric casually, then looked at Apocalypse in front of him and shrugged. "Finally caught a big fish. If you didn't take the initiative to come out, I really didn't know where to find you." Apocalypse did not speak. Most of his consciousness was still connected to control Charles's brain to control the many nuclear missiles to destroy the Earth's civilization. At this last critical step, he could only issue an order to the 4 knights. "Stop him." As soon as the 4 knights heard the order, there was a flash in front of their eyes. Caesar disappeared from where he was, and the next moment, he was in front of Apocalypse. His right fist had already landed on Apocalypse's chest. A Superman punch. Apocalypse's chest caved invisibly, and then with a bang, as if he had been hit by a super-strong shock wave, his whole body flew out violently. He broke through the inner wall of the house on the first floor, and continued to crash out into a rockery outside the courtyard, and the mountain collapsed with a rumble. Caesar shook his head and said helplessly, "I'm already here, please treat me as a person. I'm quite powerful when I'm serious." Except for Magneto, the other 3 knights were stunned. Any mutant had no power to fight back in front of Apocalypse. This was the first time they had seen Apocalypse suffer a loss. Underground of the Genius Academy, in the X-Men basement. Charles suddenly broke free from some kind of restraint, took off the mechanical helmet with both hands, gasping for breath, his pale face full of big drops of sweat. "Charles, are you okay?" Ruewen stepped forward to hold Charles's shoulder and asked worriedly. Not only her, but everyone on the scene just now, not knowing what had happened to Charles. And the Earth's civilization, by. The members of the X-Men on the field took a deep breath. Just listening to the story, they felt a chill on their backs. Only then did they know that they had walked in front of death, and Charles clenched his fists and said, "It's Caesar. Caesar is on Apocalypse's side." Seeing that Caesar had sent Apocalypse, whom they regarded as a god, flying, the eyes of the 3 knights turned red. Lady Stormsword was so furious that her hair stood on end. White electricity flowed around her body, and the sky rumbled in response to her anger. "Who do you think you're facing? That's a god." Stormsword shouted angrily, her body suspended in the air, her hands pressed toward Caesar, and a thunder and lightning split the sky into 2 and bombarded Caesar. "Sorry, he's a god, and I'm a god." "Oh no, a super god." Caesar raised his eyes coldly, his blue eyes burning red, and then his gaze turned into a solid laser beam, which collided with the thunder falling from the sky. "Kill him." The rest of the knights also moved, and the archangel flapped his metal wings, and 3 steel wings flew out like arrows. Spirit Butterfly used his telekinesis, turning it from illusion to reality, and threw out his telekinesis as a weapon. Caesar didn't mean to dodge, and let the steel wings and telekinesis weapons fall on his chest. There was a crisp sound, and the wings and weapons that cut stones like tofu were all broken and shattered at this time. What? The Archangel and Spirit Butterfly were stunned. Is that still flesh and blood? It's a body of steel, isn't it? Ah! Stormsword roared, but she couldn't hold on any longer. The summoned thunder and lightning intertwined with the X-ray laser, and the red and white energies fused and repelled each other. Finally, a strong energy wave burst out and spread out, and the house everyone was in was immediately crushed into dust. Storm's Word, Archangel, and Spirit Butterfly, the three knights were stunned by the aftermath and lay on the ground. Only Caesar stood proudly, and Eric was 10 meters away. He used a magnetic field to protect his body, and that was how he escaped. Caesar, Caesar. A strong magnetic field surrounded Eric, and debris floated in it. He stared at Caesar in the field and roared, fully activating the enhanced magnetic field. Buzz, the earth was trembling constantly. Everything within 100 meters, including houses, foundations, cars, and so on, was suspended in the air. The powerful magnetic field formed a domain in midair. Together with the objects, it rumbled and pressed down on Caesar. Caesar smiled, and his momentum rose. Without any other movement, he clenched his right hand into a fist and punched upward. A serious punch. Bang! The super-strong magnetic field was like the second heaven, but before it fell, it was broken by the powerful punch. The punch didn't just shatter everything above Caesar's head, but also the invisible magnetic field. The turbulent air surged in the air, and even the dark clouds in the sky were cleared. The bright and cold moonlight shone down and fell on Eric, who kept his hands raised. Eric looked up at Caesar, who was floating slightly low in the air, and finally fell to his knees with a sad smile. He thought he was close, but he couldn't see his teacher's back. Even if he strengthened his strength again and again, developed his abilities, tried his best to catch up, and even sold his soul to benefit from the awakening of Apocalypse, he still couldn't shake Caesar at all. Caesar was right. If Apocalypse was a god, then he himself was an existence beyond the gods. He just took a punch from me, he won't fall so quickly, right? Caesar looked in the direction where Apocalypse flew in surprise. There was no movement there. He opened his 5 senses and found that Apocalypse had already left the 4 horsemen. Where did he go? Caesar frowned slightly. In the basement of the X-Men. Under the vigilant gaze of Charles and the others, the purple portal opened, and Apocalypse stepped out of it, covering his injured chest with a fist print, and coldly locked his eyes on Charles in a wheelchair. 8. Chapter 560. Who are you? Rui Wen's face was full of vigilance as she used her body to block Charles behind her. Before Apocalypse could speak, everyone's expression changed drastically as they shouted, "Apocalypse, he's Apocalypse." Knowing that Apocalypse was extremely dangerous, Nightwalker suddenly grabbed Rui Wen's hand while Azatso put his hand on Charles's shoulder. Both of them wanted to take the most important person on the scene and escape. Apocalypse did not move. His eyes swept over everyone, a faint white light faintly glowing in his eyes. The next moment, Nightwalker and Azatso both dejectedly gave up on using their abilities. They were still a beat too late. Apocalypse had once again imprisoned space. One of his abilities was to completely counter teleportation. We must protect Professor's safety. We can only fight with him. Knowing that there was no way out, facing the menacing Apocalypse, Logan stretched out his steel claws, Rui Wen picked up a sharp blade from her knee sheath, Hank transformed into a blue-haired humanoid beast, and Alex unzipped the chest of his leather jacket. A bunch of ignorant mortals. Apocalypse shook his head disinterestedly. With a wave of his left hand, Logan and Rui Wen were sent flying by a mysterious force. With a raise of his left hand, Hank and Alex were thrown high into the air. The 4 X-Men, who were the main combatants, were almost instantly killed. Take Professor away. Nightwalker and Azatso gritted their teeth and pulled the wheelchair back, one on the left and one on the right. However, when they retreated to the platform where the mechanical helmet was placed, there was no way back. He's mine. Apocalypse indifferently opened his left hand, and Charles, who was sitting in the wheelchair, floated up and quickly flew towards him, his neck caught in his hand. Charles grabbed Apocalypse's palm with both hands, his crippled legs hanging down. He had no ability to resist the existence that was immune to mind control. This is the end. You are the key that has appeared for thousands of years. Take away your mutant ability, and I will have the power to defeat that man. Apocalypse ignored the others on the scene and left with Charles. A purple portal appeared in front of him, and he stepped directly into it. Professor! Alex groaned as he fell heavily to the ground. He crawled up as fast as he could, his knees still on the ground as he aimed his open chest at Tianqi's back. Don't! Hank hastily called out, but he was still a step too late. Alex's chest erupted with crimson energy, burning the air as he rapidly rushed towards Tianqi. Apocalypse turned a blind eye to this and walked into the portal with Charles. After the portal disappeared, the red energy suddenly fell and broke through the security door of the X-Men basement, landing where the basement energy supply was stored. Boom! A powerful explosion powerful enough to destroy the entire school building erupted near the basement. Everyone in the basement was in despair as they stared at the blazing flames in front of them. A second later, the entire school was razed to the ground by the underground explosion. Flames raged and thick smoke billowed into the sky. On the grass outside the school building, Logan, Alex, Hank, Rui-1, Nightwalker, and Azazo looked at each other blankly, not knowing what had just happened. Behind them, there was a sudden cry of defiance. I was faster this time. I saved 4 people. You only saved 2. Yes, yes. You were fast, you were the fastest. Caesar looked at the proud Quicksilver speechlessly. He was embarrassed to say that he had rushed here from 50 kilometers away. Logan looked at the two and breathed a sigh of relief. Caesar, Quicksilver, fortunately, you came in time. In that situation where they were only 1 second away from death, if it weren't for Caesar and Quicksilver, he didn't know who else could have rescued them successfully. It's not in time, it's still a step too late. Caesar looked at the ruins of the school, which also contained his precious memories. We are useless. Hank's face was ashen. Teacher Caesar. Professor Charles was taken away by Apocalypse. I already know. Caesar nodded and comforted, Charles should be fine for the time being. Apocalypse wants to deprive him of his ability. This process requires some preparation and time. The question is, where should we go to find Apocalypse? Rui-1 asked worriedly. It's simple. Caesar snapped his fingers and calmly said, I left a special energy imprint on the 4 horsemen, which can be sensed no matter where. They will definitely converge with Apocalypse, and then it will be the time of his death. Caesar's words were light, but with indescribable persuasiveness. Everyone's anxious hearts calmed down. Oh no! Caesar's face suddenly changed, as if something more serious than the end of the world had happened, which made everyone's heart jump to their throat again. I'm leaving. Jean is still waiting for me to cook dinner. You guys go ahead, I'm leaving. As soon as Caesar finished speaking, he left behind a blast of air and rushed into the night sky like a rocket. After a while, he turned into a meteor and disappeared into the sky, leaving everyone on the grass with thick black lines on their heads. A crow flew across the sky and cawed a few times. Nightwalker smiled bitterly and said, So, cooking dinner is more important than the end of the world? Teacher Caesar, he can't be coaxing the child to sleep and coming out to save the world, right? Hank was also speechless. Very likely. Future Logan rolled his eyes in annoyance. Azo spread out his hands and said, Get used to it, this is the young master. Above the ocean. Caesar quickly crossed the land and sea plates and returned to the island, but before he landed, when he was only 100 meters away from the island, a mysterious force slightly disrupted his flight. This is... Caesar landed on the beach of the island and tried to take a step in the direction of the cabin. The mysterious force continued to wash his body and mind, resisting and repelling his approach. This is a domain, a psychokinesis domain. Caesar was really stunned this time. A domain refers to the exertion of a certain ability to the extreme. For example, Yutong has the prototype of a spiritual domain. Everything within the scope of the spiritual domain can't escape her perception and observation. For example, Quicksilver has the extreme speed domain. Everything within the scope of his domain, even time, will become extremely slow. Even Caesar's doppelganger has a domain, a superhuman domain, which allows him to use his own superhuman strength at will. For example, he can carry a mountain with one hand. Generally speaking, carrying only one end of the mountain will cause the mountain to collapse, but he can distribute his strength to every part of the mountain and carry the mountain to the sky without any damage. A domain is the exertion of a certain ability to the highest level with no upper limit. At this moment, on this island, someone activated a psychokinesis domain, and all nearby creatures will be destroyed and obliterated. It's Jean. I didn't expect her to take this step so quickly. Caesar didn't know whether to be happy or worried. He ignored the strong repulsion of the psychokinesis domain and walked step by step toward the cabin as the core of the domain. Chapter 561. The powerful telekinesis turned into a substantial energy tide. With the wooden house as the center, it washed out layer by layer like a raging sea wolf, annihilating all living things within 100 meters. The island was not large to begin with. The birds resting in the forest and the fish swimming by the sea were crushed into minced meat by the telekinesis, and then the minced meat turned into nothingness. The island's ground and beach were stained with a layer of shocking pale blood. Even the air was trembling slightly. Unlike Magneto's magnetic field, everything within the telekinesis field, from the body to the mind, would face cruel attacks. Caesar turned a blind eye to this. Step by step, he steadily approached the wooden house. He did not absorb the chaotic energy escaping in the air, nor did he use superhuman abilities to resist this unconscious telekinesis field. He only relied on his strong superhuman physique to withstand the baptism of the telekinesis field. The power of the superhuman field was too strong. If he used it recklessly, Jean might suffer a backlash from her telekinesis. With Jean's fragile body, she could not take any damage at all. Caesar seemed to be pacing. No one knew that he was moving forward while bearing a pressure far greater than a mountain. The closer he got to the wooden house, the stronger the repulsion of the telekinesis field. The leaves of the trees beside the wooden house fell, and the wooden bodies were weathered bit by bit. The waves on the beach were in the opposite direction, surging and crashing into the depths of the sea. "Jean," Caesar whispered softly. He came to the wooden house and opened the closed wooden door. Jean's small body was floating 2.5 meters in the air. Her eyes were closed, and her fair and delicate face was filled with pain. Her white dress and long blonde hair moved without any wind. She really looked like a phoenix about to spread its wings and fly. Caesar opened the wooden door. The moment he saw Jean, his telekinesis increased by more than 10 times. The wooden house, which was close to its limit, disintegrated into powder bit by bit. Jean's clothes disappeared with it, revealing an intact, fair, tender body. It was as if it had been carefully sculpted by God. There was not a single blemish on it. Her body was naked, but it glowed with a faint white light, like a sacred and inviolable white jade work of art. As if sensing Caesar's gaze, she instinctively curled into a ball in the air. She hugged her chest and bent her knees. Her long blonde hair fell from her shoulders to her feet. The important parts were faintly visible, making her even more alluring. "Here." Caesar was momentarily stunned. He had seen countless women, but he had never seen a body as perfect as Jean's. Soon, his clothes, which were not protected by Superman's domain, began to disintegrate from the outside to the inside. "This is bad." Caesar smiled bitterly. The clothes on his body were destroyed into nothingness, revealing a tall body full of strong muscles. Every inch of his body contained indescribable power. If someone were to buy it, it would definitely be better than the famous statue of David. As the clothes disintegrated into nothingness, Caesar moved his body and flew towards Jean. He reached out a finger and gently tapped Jean's forehead. A dazzling light radiated from his fingertip and entered Jean's brain. That was Caesar's mental power. Unlike Yutong, Charles, and Jean, Caesar couldn't use telekinesis to control objects or creatures, but his mental strength was stronger than everyone else's. Since he couldn't use this power on his own, he might as well turn on the defense mechanism and let Jean's telekinesis enter his mental world. To others, this was tantamount to suicide. Even Apocalypse, who had lived for millions of years, did not dare to let others invade her mental world. But Caesar dared to do so because he was Superman. There was nothing in this time and space that could kill him, not even a mechanism. Where is this? Jean's soul, which had turned into a glowing body, came to a boundless place. Below them was the sparkling ocean, and above them was the starry universe. Jean looked around blankly. She didn't know why she was here. Shouldn't she be sleeping in the cabin by the sea, waiting for Teacher Caesar to come back? Then, she heard a voice from the distant horizon. "Who are you?" It was a magnetic voice that was very similar to Teacher Caesar's, but very calm. Although Jean was puzzled, she still replied, "I'm Jean. Teacher Caesar said that you can call me Phoenix." Jean. Caesar. I understand. The voice had a profound charm as it continued, "You should go back soon." Go back there? Go back to where you belong. Oh. Jean blinked her eyes as if she understood, then asked the void, "What about you? Who are you?" "Me?" The voice paused, then said, "Listen carefully, my name is Kai, outside, on the island." "Wake up, Jean." Resisting the surging sense of resistance in his heart, Caesar hugged Jean and shouted at her. Jean trembled, her psychic power receded like the tide. Her golden hair stopped flowing and she slowly opened her big eyes. Seeing Caesar's face, she asked in confusion, "Teacher Caesar, is dinner ready?" "What dinner? You're still thinking about food, you greedy little cat." Caesar's hanging heart finally relaxed, and he landed on the ground with Jean in his arms. Jean looked down and suddenly shouted, "Ah! Why am I not wearing clothes? Teacher, where are your clothes? You still have the nerve to say that." Caesar glared at her, "You don't remember what happened just now?" "Just now?" Jean tilted her little head and suddenly said, "Right, I went to a strange place, and there was someone chatting with me." Caesar asked curiously, "What did you talk about?" "We talked." In Caesar's arms, Jean noticed that their bodies were close together without any barrier. Her white skin quickly turned pink, and her body temperature also rose. Her heart beat so fast that she almost couldn't breathe. Her little face blushed, and she said carelessly, "It's something very important, but I forgot." "Forget it if you want to." Caesar also felt that the atmosphere was a bit strange. Thinking of the amazing scene just now, he couldn't help but fly up and fall into the sea with Jean. The cold sea water allowed the two bodies, one big and one small, to relax, and also cooled down the ambiguous temperature. "Teacher Caesar, didn't you go to save the world?" Jean came out of the sea and asked deliberately to find a topic to talk about. "Aren't you my world?" Rubbing Jean's little head, Caesar looked at her and smiled sincerely, "Jean, it's great that you're okay. It's great that you're okay." Jean whispered, a pair of small hands on her left chest, where her heart had not completely calmed down, and a seed planted in the bottom of her heart had quietly sprouted. Caesar sighed worriedly and said, "That's great. The house is gone, the clothes are gone, and dinner is not cooked." If X-Men and others knew that he was worried about this, they would be speechless and wouldn't know what to say. Chapter 562. America, Boston, bordering the Atlantic Ocean. Inside a midnight cafeteria that was open all night. The sky outside had just turned bright, and before the morning sun had set, two unusual guests had arrived. The man was young and handsome, and the woman was young and cute. They both wore clothes that didn't fit, but they couldn't hide their noble temperament. The two of them sat in the corner, ordered a table full of food, and then ate heartily without caring about their image. He watched the blond youth finish the second plate of medium-rare steak without any sign of his stomach bulging, and his hands didn't show any signs of stopping. The owner of the midnight cafeteria was secretly speechless. He didn't know which noble child had been kicked out of his house, and he began to worry if the two of them could afford the meal. Also, the little girl was too pitiful. She probably hadn't eaten for 3 days. If it weren't for the little girl, the owner would have asked for payment in advance. Teacher. The wooden house is gone. What should we do? Jean opened her cute eyes wide, and imitated him. She picked up a large piece of steak with her small hand and gnawed hard. Unfortunately, her little hand was too weak, and the beef was too tough. After chewing for a long time, she still couldn't tear off a small piece of meat. Jean pouted and looked at Caesar with an aggrieved expression. I'll do it. Caesar smiled and picked up the knife. He didn't seem to do anything, but the beef on Jean's plate suddenly burst into a dozen pieces of candied beef. Thank you, teacher. Jean smiled brightly, and her eyes curved like crescent moons. Eat. Make plans after you're full. If the wooden house is gone, we can build another one. Caesar shrugged indifferently, as if he had sensed the cafeteria owner's thoughts. He fished out an item from his pocket, and with a flick of his finger, the item flew in a high parabola and landed accurately on the owner's head 10 meters away. The cafeteria owner was shocked and reached out to take the item off his head. The item was hard and round, like a large coin, but it shone brightly under the light. This is a gold coin? Such a big one. The cafeteria owner was stunned. He took a closer look and saw the British national emblem on the gold coin. It was an old code and couldn't be faked. This was the high-grade currency used by the upper-class nobles. That's the cost of the meal and the tip. Is that enough? Caesar's calm voice drifted over. Enough, enough. The cafeteria owner was overjoyed and nodded respectfully in response. Jean picked up a small piece of beef with a fork, added some sauce, and put it in her mouth to slowly chew. As if she suddenly sensed something, her small hand holding the fork suddenly stopped, and her brows slightly furrowed. What's wrong? Caesar noticed Jean's strange behavior and could not help but look at her in surprise. Did she activate her domain again? Teacher. Jean closed her eyes before opening them again. Her face was filled with worry as she said, I heard the screams and wails of many people. Where are you from? Caesar thought for a moment and asked. Jean was silent for a moment, and then with a thought, she pointed to the east. Over there. That was the direction of New York, Caesar immediately understood. In his perception, one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse had also appeared in New York City. Boss, Caesar called out. Sir, what can I do for you? Hearing the call, the boss immediately went forward to greet him. His attitude was a complete 180 degrees from before. Can you turn on the television? Caesar lifted his chin and gestured to the television in the cafeteria hall. No problem, I'll turn it on now. As if he had received an order, the boss quickly went forward to turn on the television. As the television screen lit up, the morning news was playing. Good morning, everyone. This is New York TV. Now, we have urgent news. Just 10 minutes ago, the central streets of New York City were attacked by many robots of unknown origin. Many houses, buildings, and vehicles were destroyed. Although there are no casualties so far, it has caused serious traffic jams and panic among the people. As the female anchor spoke smoothly, the video on the screen switched to the reporter's camera. In the blurry and bumpy camera, the formerly prosperous and advanced New York City could be seen. The streets were abnormally chaotic, and the streets were filled with panicked people. The street area behind them was shrouded in thick flames and black smoke. Bam! Something heavy seemed to fall from the sky. After the camera focused, a 2-meter-tall robot made of metal walked out of the black smoke. It didn't chase after the people. Instead, it lifted a car on the side of the road and easily flipped it over and threw it 10 meters away. Boom! The car slammed into the phone booth and immediately exploded into a ball of fire. Glass shards scattered everywhere. These robots that invaded New York were not alone. There were more of the same type. They continued to fall onto the streets of New York like meteors. Their eyes shot out scorching laser beams, wantonly destroying buildings and cars on the road. In just a few minutes, the central city of New York had turned into ruins. Flames and smoke were everywhere. It was a horrifying scene like the end of the world. My God, what are those monsters? The cafeteria boss's mouth was wide open. The first-generation Sentinels. Caesar whispered to himself. He didn't need to think to know that this was Magneto's doing. The first-generation Sentinels already had some amazing attributes, such as supersonic flight, superhuman strength, combat sharing, laser beam, and other abilities. However, they still couldn't perfectly replicate the abilities of the mutants. The most important thing was that the first-generation Sentinels were made of metal. In front of Magneto, they were nothing. The real threat was the second-generation improved version of the Sentinels. They were no longer made of metal. They could continuously replicate and collect mutants to perfect themselves. A second-generation Sentinel could be said to be a weakened version of Apocalypse. Teacher, do you want to go? Jean looked at the TV and turned to ask Caesar. No need. Caesar shook his head. In his opinion, this should be Magneto's personal behavior. It had nothing to do with Apocalypse. The Sentinels were specially created by the superpower government to eliminate the mutants. Now that they were threatened by the Sentinels, it was like shooting themselves in the foot. Immediately. Magneto didn't target ordinary people. He only destroyed the city blocks. This was already merciful. Just as Caesar thought of this, in the live news footage, the Sentinels that wreaked havoc in New York gathered together and flew away in the same direction, leaving behind a mess of ruins. They ran away. Where did they go? Jean tilted her head in confusion. Where else can they go? That direction is Washington. The corner of Caesar's mouth twitched slightly. He was just wondering when Magneto became so principled, but in the next second, he took the Sentinel and ran to Washington. Washington was the White House, the center of government power. Chapter 563. Above the Sky. Nearly 20 Sentinels were at an altitude of 3,000 meters, and the rising golden sun fell on them, and their shells reflected a faint metallic luster. Like migratory birds migrating, they formed a triangular formation and flew near the city of Washington at supersonic speed, leaving a trail of white smoke behind them. On the spacious back of the leader of the Sentinels, Magneto Eric was sitting cross-legged. He was wearing a special helmet made for him by Apocalypse, dressed in a complete combat uniform, and a gray cloak fluttering majestically on his shoulders. Almost there. Magneto narrowed his eyes dangerously and looked down. He could see a city sitting on the earth with countless high-rise buildings rising like steel mountains and towering into the clouds. Washington, I'm back. Magneto sneered, and at this moment, a sharp buzzing sound came in his ears. 3 modern Eagle fighters were flying towards the Sentinels at high speed, and when Magneto looked over, several airborne missiles had been aimed at the Sentinels and fired. You really don't learn your lesson. Magneto whispered to himself, and he didn't make any movements. He just waved his hand gently at the missiles, and the airborne missiles immediately stopped moving forward, turned directly in mid-air, and shot back at the Eagle fighters. The pilots flying the Eagle fighter did not expect this situation at all. 2 of the pilots reacted in time. They either controlled the fighter to dive down or pulled up, narrowly avoiding the rebounding missile. The other Eagle fighter was not so lucky. It happened to be hit by 2 missiles and did not avoid them in time. It was destroyed on the spot, and the wreckage turned into a burning fireball and fell down. Number 3. The surviving pilots let out a sorrowful cry in unison, and then looked in the direction of the sentinels again, but saw Magneto sitting on the sentinel. The pilot seemed to have seen death, and his face turned pale in an instant, and he immediately reported back to the Ground Command Center, "This is Air Force Falcon 1, number 3 has been destroyed by missiles. The wanted criminal Magneto is on one of the sentinels. I repeat, Magneto is with the sentinels, and I request to withdraw back to the base." "Roger, withdraw to the base first." Hearing the instructions issued by the Ground Command Center, the two Eagle fighters did not hesitate at all and immediately turned back at high altitude. Magneto's ability is magnetic field control. Even if people all over the world know this information, it is still a nightmare to really deal with him outside. After all, modern weapons and munitions, from firearms and bullets to rockets and missiles, are basically made of metal, and they are not as useful as a small water gun to Magneto. Want to run? Seeing the two Eagles retreating, Magneto smiled coldly, and under his magnetic field manipulation, 4 sentinels immediately flew out of the team and accelerated to chase after the Eagle fighters. 10 seconds later, the sentinels were surrounded, and destroyed sentinels, and they fell into the wilderness below with billowing black smoke. The group of sentinels continued to fly forward in a domineering manner. They flew across the sky of Washington and entered the bustling central area of the city under the shocked and doubtful gazes of countless people. They were even captured by many cameras and broadcasted on advertising screens. Magneto commanded the Sentinel team and soon arrived over the White House. At this time, the White House had already been occupied by military forces. Special Forces cars were parked in nearby streets, fully armed soldiers surrounded the White House, and helicopters were patrolling back and forth at low altitude. Inside the White House, the current president, as well as a group of generals and members of parliament, were staying in the closed hall on the 3rd floor. The scientist Trask raised his eyes as if he had sensed something, and the others followed him. Through the window of the hall on the 3rd floor, they could see Magneto floating in the air, and the figure of a Sentinel team descending from the sky. "Trask. The robots outside are the Sentinel machines you said were created to eliminate the mutated humans?" The current president looked at Trask and said in a deep voice, "But now, those Sentinels are in the hands of mutants, destroying our city, killing our soldiers, and threatening our lives." Trask lowered his head and was speechless. "Let me ask you, can our army deal with those Sentinels?" The current president asked solemnly. According to the Sentinel combat attributes, to destroy a Sentinel, at least 50 people of armed firepower are needed. And the number of a dozen. Trask hesitated, and finally sighed, "With the current deployment combat power, it is impossible to fight." The people in the conference hall heard this conclusion and their faces turned pale. "So, now, we are just going to stay inside and wait for death?" The current president's face was livid, and his hands were clenched into fists. The helicopters that were patrolling at low altitude near the White House, after Magneto approached, under the amazing magnetic repulsion, they uncontrollably gave way to the airspace area. "He's here." The armed soldiers guarding in front of the White House raised their special guns in unison and aimed at Magneto, who was descending. "Oh? Non-metal materials?" Magneto looked at the soldiers and the guns in their hands thoughtfully, and suddenly pressed his hands up, and the armed soldiers suddenly fell down like wheat. "Even if it's the human body, there are traces of metal inside. Unless you change your body into a plastic body." Magneto's face was expressionless, and his boots stepped on the ground. If it was him before, he naturally couldn't do this. But under the buff given by Apocalypse, magnetic field control can manipulate all metals in this area at will. This is the magnetic field domain, close to God. Unfortunately, even this pseudo-invincible super-strong domain was broken by Caesar with one punch, just one punch. A trace of dimness flashed in Magneto's eyes, and he quickly regained his composure and cleaned up the military forces outside the White House. Then 20 Sentinels floated in the air at the same time, surrounding the White House building. "Still not coming out?" Seeing that there was no movement inside the White House, Magneto shook his head and raised his hands. With a violent tremor, the entire roof of the White House was lifted by the magnetic field, revealing the inner third-floor conference hall. Huh? Magneto frowned, but the White House was empty, not to mention the presidential officials. Even the soldiers and security guards were nowhere to be seen. Just now, the magnetic field clearly sensed the presence of someone inside. Magneto turned his head, and in the open space 10 meters behind him, accompanied by a red flame glow, Logan, Quicksilver, Alex, and Azazo in X-Men battle uniforms came out. "It's over, Eric." The female voice came from the hall on the third floor of the White House. Magneto turned around again and saw Rui-1, Hank, and Nightwalker in X-Men battle uniforms appearing together with a blue flame glow. The X-Men police team, one in front and one behind, surrounded Magneto and the Sentinels. Chapter 564. The White House in Washington. This area, which was occupied by the Sentinels and turned into a battlefield, was quiet at this time, and no ordinary human army came here again. The X-Men team headed by the future Logan and Magneto, who commanded the Sentinel group, faced each other with dignified faces, and even the air was filled with a strong smell of gunpowder. This scene was just like a few years ago, when Magneto and Professor X were on how to treat ordinary humans and the future of the collective mutants. In the end, due to disagreements, they parted ways and went to opposite sides. What Professor X thought was that mutants did not need to hide their differences and could get along with ordinary people openly. What Magneto thought was to let mutants rule ordinary humans or transform this world into a world of mutants. The two were like rationality and sensibility wrestling with each other, and it was difficult to distinguish one from the other. Rui-1 in the X-Men team took the initiative to break the silence and said, "Eric, give up. Apocalypse's intention is to destroy civilization and restore order, so everyone has to submit to him. That is not the future we aspire to pursue." Rui-1, "You're okay." Magneto narrowed his eyes and looked at Rui-1. Rui-1 looked at him and said coldly, "Yes, I'm fine, I'm still alive and well. This is all thanks to you. It's a pity that the bullet didn't end my life." Magneto was silent and did not refute. He just calmly said, "I had no choice, that was for the sake of the overall situation." "Oh, the overall situation? That's not what you said when you asked me to go with you. You said that each of us is an inseparable existence." Rui-1 sneered and finally saw his face and continued to ask, "And your current behavior is just as Apocalypse's thug. Is this also for the future of mutants?" Rui-1. "You'll understand my intentions later." Magneto didn't want to quibble and lie. He glanced at the many X-Men members on the field, opened his hands, and whispered inexplicably, "My purpose has been achieved." Purpose? What's the purpose? The members of the X-Men were stunned when they heard this. Magneto came to the White House with the Sentinels. Wasn't it directed at the current president and the council officials, and the people in the White House just now had already been teleported to a safe place by them? If Magneto's goal is not the White House, then what is it? The X-Men members suddenly realized that they seemed to have missed something very important. Not giving them a chance to think more, Magneto waved his hand and issued an order to the Sentinel suspended in the low air. The Sentinel's eyes glowed and he immediately turned into a fighting machine and accelerated towards the X-Men members. Seeing the Sentinels coming this way, the members of the X-Men were shocked and could only put aside the distracting thoughts in their minds and go all out to fight the Sentinels created to eliminate mutants. A fierce battle began in the White House. At the other side. New York, downtown streets. After the Sentry Group's wanton destruction, there were still some places where the open flames had yet to be extinguished, and thick smoke rose into the blue sky. The people in this area had been temporarily evacuated, and the local police had pulled up a caution tape outside to prevent pedestrians from entering. But at this moment, the ground suddenly shook violently, and a throbbing aura came from the center of the uninhabited area. What's going on here? Several parked police cars were still sounding their sirens, and the police officer who was organizing the evacuation of people swayed and almost fell to the ground. He barely stood up with the street lamp on the street, raised his head, and looked back at the central area where the crowd had been dispersed. In the next moment, a look of horror appeared on his face as if he had seen something incredible. Under the refraction of the black sunglasses worn by the police officer, a gleaming pyramid could be seen rising from the central city of New York. Countless buildings and city streets were crushed and covered by the pyramid until the tip of the pyramid towered into the clouds. The neighboring five-star skyscrapers, which were more than 100 stories high, were not even up to the waist of the pyramid. It was like a small child in the presence of a great magician. There was no comparison at all. Miracle, this is a miracle. Not only the police officers who surrounded the cordon, but the people of New York who saw this scene nearby were directly frightened to the ground, and then knelt down towards the pyramid in horror. Near the top of the pyramid, shimmering with sacred light, there was a wide and flat ancient altar. At this time, on the altar, Charles was tied to a stone bed, and a second stone bed was prepared next to him. This was a necessary ritual before Apocalypse deprived others of their mutant abilities. Whoa! Charles struggled desperately on the stone bed. His mouth was sealed, and there was a big bald head on his head. The reason was that Apocalypse didn't like his hair. In order to successfully complete the power-stripping ritual, she removed his hair in advance. It's really over now. Not only are his legs disabled, but even his hair is gone. How can he be the little prince of the nightclub in the future? Charles's eyes were full of despair. So what if he became stronger? It was still not as important as that elegant and handsome hair. Master Apocalypse. On the open space of the altar of the pyramid, Stormwind, Spirit Butterfly, and the Archangel, the three knights were kneeling on one knee, worshipping Apocalypse standing in front of them. The Archangel, the leader of the knights, reported, according to Magneto's plan, he alone will attract the attention of those mutants, and the three of us will take the opportunity to converge to ensure that your ritual is completed smoothly. Very good. Apocalypse gently nodded. He was about to say something when he suddenly raised his eyes and looked outside the pyramid. Not far away, there was a probe helicopter approaching this side. They really dare to come and disturb Master Apocalypse's good deed. The Archangel's eyes burst with cold light, and he spread the metal wings behind him, wanting to fly towards the helicopter, but he was stopped by Stormwind. Let me do it, this is my home ground. Lady Stormsword took a deep breath and raised both of her hands to the sky. As her eyes flashed with lightning, the originally clear sky was instantly covered by dark clouds. Go! Stormwind's hands pressed down, thunder roared in the sky, and the thunder and lightning destroyed the helicopter's propeller, causing the helicopter to fall out of control to the ground. A pilot jumped out of the helicopter cabin in panic. The Archangel snorted softly, "You are still too kind, can't you just destroy the helicopter together with the people?" Stormwind did not speak, and continued to control the thunderclouds and typhoons, summoning a violent storm around the pyramid. Thunder and lightning intertwined like a net, forming a natural defense that the helicopter could not break through. Very good, this way, no one can break through to the altar here. The Archangel nodded with satisfaction. As soon as his voice fell, a figure suddenly broke through from outside the pyramid, ignoring the storm and thunder net, and landed lightly on the altar where they were. Chapter 565. Thud thud. Caesar's shoes landed on the pyramid's altar hall. He was wearing a black and gray trench coat that reached his calves. Due to his high speed of flight, it fluttered behind him. He carried Xiaofan in a princess carry and gently placed her on the ground. He even helped her tidy up her messy blonde hair. The Archangel felt a stinging pain on his face, as if someone had slapped him in the face. After all, he had just said that no one could break through this natural barrier. But in fact, there were not many people in the world who could ignore the storm and lightning protection, and Caesar was one of them. At this moment, the other two knights were not in the mood to tease the Archangel. Spirit Butterfly and Lady Stormsword were tense like never before. The last encounter was still vivid in their minds. Seeing the harmless Caesar in front of them again, they were fearful as if they were facing a humanoid monster. Only those who had fought with Caesar would know how far they were from the strongest. Caesar ignored the three knights with fear on their faces. He did not even bother with Apocalypse. Instead, he looked at Charles, who was tied to the stone bed in front of him, and could not help but laugh. "I say, Charles, why are you getting worse and worse each time? Either your legs are crippled or your hair is falling out. Now you've even become an old man's sacrifice." Whoa. Charles glared at Caesar. This damn bastard and bad friend. He was already in such a miserable situation, but he still picked on his scars to tease him. How could he live? At the same time, Charles's chaotic and anxious heart suddenly calmed down completely. His tense muscles also relaxed. Because he knew very well that as long as Caesar was here, all the problems would no longer be a problem. If you ask why, it was because he was Caesar. Superman Caesar. It's you. Apocalypse raised his shining eyes and stared straight at Caesar. His dark blue face was as calm as before, but his tone changed for the first time. You are the strongest person I've met in this world since I came to know. Those mutated humans who claimed to be gods in the old era are not half as good as you. Aren't you also a mutant who claims to be a god? Caesar looked at Tian-Chi curiously. Tian-Chi was unusually tall and wore an ancient cloak with a hood. He looked like an old Western swindler from the olden days. I am different from them. I'm different from all ordinary humans and even mutants. I'm a true god of the old world. Tian-Chi spread open his arms as if he was stating an indisputable fact. He said proudly but calmly, no matter how powerful they are, they will still die of old age, and I have lived for almost 10,000 years. His body is immortal, and the light of his soul competes with the radiance of the stars in the sky. He possesses nearly 500 types of mutated abilities that involve various boundaries, and he is proficient in all the knowledge in this world. Omnipotent and omniscient, this is a realm that only gods can reach. After Tian-Chi finished speaking, the archangel and the other two knights all knelt down on one knee in reverence and submission. The fear that had arisen from Caesar just now was also swept away. If Tian-Chi asked them to die now, they wouldn't hesitate to kill themselves. A very special telepathy. Jean, who was next to Caesar, suddenly whispered. "What's wrong, Jean?" Caesar asked curiously. "That strange blue-skinned uncle used a special telepathy ability on us." Jean's little hand tightly grasped the corner of Caesar's shirt and shrunk behind him in fear. She pointed at Tian-Chi and said weakly. Tian-Chi didn't say anything. A white light flashed in his eyes as he stared at Jean, thinking about something. Spirit Butterfly shouted, "What are you talking about? Why would Lord Tian-Chi use any telepathy ability?" Spirit Butterfly's ability was a branch of telepathy. If someone used telepathy on her, there was no way she wouldn't have noticed. Unless the ability was so hidden that even a telepathy mutant couldn't detect it. As expected. You must have used some sort of special spirit ability to make your words infectious, subtly influencing the hearts of others, subconsciously making them acknowledge you. Caesar looked at the silent Tian-Chi as if he had seen through everything. He glanced at the archangel and the others. Rather than calling you a knight, it's better to call you a puppet. You. The archangel spread her steel wings and was about to attack, but she was quickly stopped by Lady Stormsword. The latter reminded her, "You can't beat him," so the archangel quickly stopped all actions. Spirit Butterfly's eyes flashed with a complicated expression, but she didn't ask any more questions. Ignorant mortals. Tian-Chi finally opened his mouth and looked at Caesar, a faint murderous aura surging from his body. He was really angry. "Yes, I'm just a mortal. I really don't want to be a god. It's so tiring to be a god. I have to drive the Rainbow Bridge all day long and fight all over the 9 realms. Caesar seemed to have let go of himself and said something that no one present could understand. Also, you just said that the strongest person you've met is me, right? Unfortunately, among the people I've met, there are probably less than 5 who are stronger than you. More than 5 people are stronger than me. How is that possible? Tianqi's tone was still as tranquil as an ancient well, but the expression on his face finally changed. That's right. Caesar shrugged and counted with his fingers. One of them is a mortal, a pure mortal. He doesn't have any special abilities. If having money counts as an ability, then pretend I didn't say anything. His name is Tani. He once had a mortal body and a heart of steel, comparable to a god. There's a green fatty. Although he doesn't like people calling him fatty, he's also called Hulk. Hulk is the second personality hidden in his body. He once pressed a true god to the ground and ruthlessly rubbed him against the ground. There's an old woman called Alpha Centauri. Yes, she's bald like Charles now. She's lived for 500 years without aging or dying. If she's here, you probably won't have anything to do with her. There's a man who carries a hammer all day long. His name is Saul. Although he has many human flaws, he's a true god. He's much better than you, a scammer in the name of God. There's also a joker. Let's not mention his name. He has the power of star morning in his body. His father is a vital planet. Every time Caesar mentioned an old friend, he couldn't hide his excitement and nostalgia. It wasn't until he counted enough on one hand that he concluded. There are many people stronger than you. How is that possible? Tani, Bruce, Alpha Centauri. Who are they? Tianqi looked at the 3 horsemen in disbelief. The 3 horsemen were also at a loss. Obviously, they had never heard of these names. They're not here. They're in a place very far away. Caesar sighed and stroked Jean's little head. He then said without stopping, "There's also my new disciple, Jean. She's also stronger than you." When he said that, not only were Tianqi and the horsemen stunned, even Jean herself was stunned. Chapter 566. Are you joking with me? Tianqi's cold gaze fell on Qin, who was less than 10 years old. Although his face was still expressionless, his words contained unconcealable anger. Qin was clearly frightened by Tianqi. She hid behind Caesar in fear, her little hands tightly clutching the corner of his clothes. The 3 horsemen also shook their heads in disappointment. They could accept that Caesar could threaten Tianqi, but to say that a little girl like Qin was more powerful than Tianqi was truly a fantasy. The most devout of the 3 horsemen, Lady Stormsword, even shouted at Caesar, "You're blaspheming a god." "I'm not joking." Caesar's tone was as firm as ever. "Teacher Caesar, am I really that powerful?" Qin looked at Caesar in bewilderment like a Persian kitten. This made Caesar touch his nose awkwardly. He coughed and said, "Save some face for your teacher. Don't doubt yourself. I believe you can do it." "Okay." The obedient Qin mustered up her courage, clenched her little pink fist, and waved it at Tianqi. She deliberately said fiercely, I'm very strong." Tianqi continued to remain silent. His dark blue face looked a little dark. The 3 horsemen beside him didn't know what to say. No matter how they looked at it, Qin was just a little girl who was afraid of strangers. No matter how she pretended, she couldn't change her childish nature, let alone be compared to a god like Tianqi. "You don't believe me, do you?" Caesar smiled and stroked Qin's little head. He suddenly suggested, "How about this? I won't make a move later. Qin will be your opponent. If you win, I'll leave immediately and let you continue with the altar ceremony. If you lose, I want you to be my slave for 100 years. As soon as he said this, the altar hall of the pyramid fell silent again. Tianqi's expression changed. His eyes turned slightly. No one knew what he was thinking. The three knights were bewildered. They looked at Tianqi and then at Qin, not knowing how to describe this proposal that was infinitely beneficial to their side. Charles, who was tied to the stone bed, whimpered and struggled continuously. He had actually been used as a bet by Caesar. This made him want to curse at Caesar. Qin looked up at Caesar in confusion, not understanding why her teacher was so confident in her. How is it? Tianqi, if you think this proposal is disadvantageous to you, you can change your opponent to me. At the same time, Caesar was ready to roll up his sleeves. Tianqi narrowed his eyes and nodded. All right. I agree with this suggestion. He had no reason to refuse. After all, he really did not have absolute confidence in winning against Caesar before he seized Charles's ability. And if the opponent was Jean, this would undoubtedly be a giveaway. Jean took the initiative to rub her head against Caesar's hand and whispered, "Mr. Caesar, can I really?" "Don't worry." Caesar squatted down and put his hands on Jean's shoulders. Face to face, he said earnestly, "Jean, you have unimaginable potential. Your body contains unimaginable potential. As long as you follow what I taught you on the island, try to relax as much as possible, and naturally guide your inner strength out." Jean's amber blue eyes widened, reflecting Caesar's face close to her. A touch of pink appeared on her cute face. "Teacher, if it's what you said, then I'm willing to try. I don't trust others, much less myself. But I trust you, teacher. If you say I can do it, then I can definitely do it." Jean took a deep breath and turned around. She walked away from Caesar and stood facing the tall Tianqi alone, about 10 meters away. "Of course you can do it, because you are my disciple." Caesar smiled knowingly and moved a few steps to the side of the altar hall with the three knights. "You don't mind me standing here, right?" Caesar glanced at the three angels. "Welcome, welcome." Fairy Butterfly and Lady Stormsword forced smiles. With the temper of an angel from the underground deathmatch arena, if it were anyone else, he would have already flapped his steel wings. But his opponent was Caesar, who he couldn't beat. He could only sullenly curl his steel wings, not daring to touch Caesar. After Caesar and the three knights moved aside, only Tianqi and Jean stood facing each other in the center of the altar hall. "Jean, it's up to you." Caesar gazed at Jean's small figure, an inexplicable smile appearing on his lips. "I'm going to go." Tianqi signaled to Qin, but Qin ignored him and closed her eyes. "Humph, ignorant mortal." Tianqi raised his left hand. He had the belief that he wouldn't be defeated in 10,000 years. He even thought of thousands of ways to kill Jean. But to ensure a smooth victory, he chose to use his full strength. Even a lion had to use its full strength to catch a rabbit. Super dynamic vision. White light appeared in Tianqi's eyes. In his vision, time seemed to slow down. Then, stainless steel armor. A set of armor cloak that could resist missile bombardment quickly appeared on his body. Air shield. The air around Tianqi condensed, forming a contrasting air shield that could withstand a direct hit from an atomic bomb. 10 times buff. Tianqi's physique grew stronger, and all his physique was strengthened tenfold. Telepathy immunity. Tianqi's spiritual world built layers of barriers. Even someone as strong as Charles couldn't control him through telepathy. Space restriction. Tianqi restricted the space around him and Jean. The mutated humans inside couldn't use any teleportation abilities. Body element control. Tianqi turned his body into an ultimate weapon. He could change his body parts into weapons at will to deal with any changes in the battle. After activating dozens of enhancements and defensive abilities in just half a second, Tianqi's aura alone was enough to make people breathless. Energy generation. Tianqi raised his palms. As he absorbed the energy in the air, a dazzling golden power gathered in his hands. This attack could easily destroy a skyscraper. Tianqi looked ahead. Jean didn't feel anything. Her eyes were still closed, and her mouth was muttering something. Tianqi, whose hearing had been enhanced, could naturally hear it. She was saying, like teacher said, relax and release everything inside. I can do it. It's over. If you want to blame someone, blame that teacher of yours for sending you to your death. A cold smile appeared on Tianqi's face as he unleashed the energy he had been accumulating in his hand, causing the air around him to explode. Jean was about to be engulfed by the powerful energy and turned into nothingness. The next moment, Jean suddenly opened her eyes. Her feet left the ground, and she floated low in the air. A mysterious and frightening power awakened in Xiao Zhao's body. That power formed a pair of golden wings that resembled a sacred halo that materialized on her back. She looked like a phoenix. Chapter 567. The storm outside the pyramid was still going on. The sky was dark and looked like it was about to collapse. Lightning and thunder interweaved in the clouds like a net. Bolts of purple lightning fell from the sky and landed on the city's spires and lampposts. It was as spectacular as divine punishment. After the attack of the sentinels, the appearance of the pyramid, and the torture of the natural disaster, the people in New York City were already exhausted. At this moment, a dazzling golden light as warm as the sun shone from the top of the pyramid. Just the faint light at the edge was enough to penetrate the dark clouds and darkness that shrouded the city. What is that? The policeman on duty in the rain looked up in shock. His eyes were illuminated by the golden light that kept overflowing from the pyramid. He was not the only one. On this day, the people who were still in downtown New York looked up and saw the light that illuminated the entire city. At the top of the pyramid, on the altar. Looking at Jean, who now had a completely new aura, the three knights' faces were filled with astonishment. Just the remnant waves of power that were seeping out from her body made them unable to look straight at her with their eyes full of golden light. Their bodies also started to feel a stinging pain. Jean opened her eyes. Her eyes seemed to be burning with her inner emotions. She was like a phoenix in the sky. After falling into the dust of the human world for so long, she was finally able to spread her wings and dance proudly. Jean gently unfurled the golden wings behind her. As the wings trembled slightly, a shrill cry like the cry of a phoenix resounded through the clouds. A power far greater than the explosion of an atomic bomb gathered nearby, tearing everything in front of it apart. Danger! The three knights at the edge of the battle changed their expressions. The angel leader quickly spread the steel wings in front of her to protect herself. Spirit Butterfly's mind turned into a purple shield in front of her. Lady Stormsword summoned lightning from the sky and intertwined it beside her body. The three knights who were not targeted by the power were already in such a state, let alone Apocalypse who was targeted by the power. This is impossible. Apocalypse opened his eyes wide in disbelief. He used all his strength to blast out energy. The next moment, the energy beam he blasted out was melted and dissipated. Then, the space wall, the air wall, and the steel armor on his body, everything. In front of Jean's awakened power, everything was as fragile as paper. Idiot, that's the power of the phoenix. If you dodge, you might have a chance to survive. When Caesar saw this scene, he knew that the outcome had been decided. The power of the phoenix could even tear the universe apart, facing it head-on. Not to mention dozens of mutated abilities, even if Tianqi was given hundreds of abilities, he still wouldn't be able to resist head-on. What was the power of the phoenix? If it was said that a domain was the upper limit of a certain ability, then the power of the phoenix was above this upper limit. Jean's mind domain could be considered invincible to begin with, but it was not the pseudo-invincibility of Magneto's magnetic field domain. When the magnetic field was used to the extreme, it could only control the majority of matter. However, when the will was used to the extreme, all matter, even souls and energy would be controlled. Therefore, the power of the phoenix, which was beyond the realm of consciousness, was strong enough to tear the universe apart, not to mention Apocalypse, the first mutant who claimed to be a god. Ah! Tenfa screamed in extreme pain. Under the attack of the phoenix's power, all of his defensive abilities were instantly torn into nothingness, revealing his withered body that was so thin that it was just skin and bones. That's right. Usually, Tian Qi wore armor and a cloak. He looked tall and mighty like a true god, but in reality, he was just an old and short body. Even if Tian Qi's body had been strengthened, his body and even his soul would be torn to shreds by the power of the phoenix. I admit defeat. Don't kill me. In the despair of death, Tian Qi finally shouted something he had never said before. However, Jean had not fully mastered the power of the phoenix, so she could not stop releasing it just because she wanted to. Under the tearing and destruction of the phoenix's power, all of Tian Qi's hair was gone. His body was covered in blood, and his withered body was covered in countless cracks. Just as Tian Qi was about to be annihilated by the power of the phoenix, a figure suddenly rushed into the area enveloped by the power of the phoenix. Is he crazy? The three knights who were using their abilities to stabilize their defenses were shocked. The figure who rushed forward was Caesar, who had been watching from the side. Caesar quickly rushed into the area enveloped by the power of the phoenix, reached out to grab Tian Qi's arm, and leaped high into the air, pulling Tian Qi with him as they escaped. Half a second later, the cries of the phoenix in the sky fell silent. The golden light on Jean's wings dimmed until she returned to her normal appearance. Only then did she slowly return to the ground of the altar. The sky had cleared up, and a ray of warm sunlight shone on the pyramid. It's finally over. The three knights collapsed on the ground, exhausted. Even the aftermath of the phoenix's power made them feel like they had taken a trip to the gates of hell. Thud. Caesar descended from the sky and tossed Tian Qi to the ground with a casual flick of his hand. Tian Qi's naked body curled up, and his shattered muscles and skin quickly healed. He changed into a simple set of clothes to cover himself, and looked at Caesar in shock. Why did you save me? Caesar spread his hands and said, You admitted defeat just now. According to our agreement, you're already my slave. It's only normal for me to save my own slave. Although his body quickly healed, Tian Qi seemed to have been drained of all his strength. He pressed his hands against the ground and muttered in a daze, Yes. I've lost, I've completely lost. As if thinking of something, Tian Qi suddenly raised his head and stared at Caesar with bloodshot eyes. Just now. Under that powerful force that could annihilate everything, all his abilities and defenses couldn't withstand a single blow. Even his mind was almost destroyed. But this harmless young man in front of him didn't just use his body to resist, he even had the strength to save him. I see. Tian Qi shook his head thoughtfully, then took a deep breath and lowered his head to Caesar. Not just 100 years, even 1,000 years, I'm willing to listen to your orders. Master. Just call me young master, Caesar said with a nod. Young master, Tian Qi quickly responded, already in the role of a servant. The other three knights were dumbfounded. Their lord Tian Qi, whom they regarded as a god, had really become someone else's slave? Then what were they? Qin, beautifully done. Full marks for this practical lesson. Tonight, I'll take you to eat something delicious. Caesar walked over happily, picked up Qin with both hands, and kissed her hard on the cheek. Qin covered her cheek, and her face instantly turned red like an apple. She lowered her head and said, Practical lesson? The three knights looked at each other, and even Tian Qi's mouth twitched. Couldn't this master and disciple pair treat them seriously as opponents? Chapter 568. This one-sided, unconventional battle not only shattered Tian Chi's void deity position, but also made him understand an old saying passed down in the Eastern Great Country from his body to his mind. There was always someone better than you. As if he wanted to remember today's lesson, Apocalypse was no longer wearing his steel armor. Instead, he maintained his skinny old body and only put on a simple cloak. He looked simple and unadorned as he stood beside Caesar with his head lowered like an old servant, waiting for his orders. Even if a believer of Apocalypse walked up to him, he probably wouldn't recognize that this old slave who was half a step into the grave was the old world god who was once so arrogant that he almost ruled Earth. After all, even the three horsemen almost couldn't recognize Apocalypse at this time. "Apocalypse, can I get rid of your pyramid?" Caesar asked Apocalypse, who was beside him, as he carried Qin and kicked the hard floor of the altar hall with the tip of his foot. "Of course, young master." Tian Chi nodded in response before pressing his thin and frail hands downward. The mountain-sized pyramid began to tremor violently, and cracks began to spread from the outside to the inside. It appeared as if it were about to collapse at any moment. After 3 minutes, it will completely collapse and disappear from this city forever. Apocalypse looked at the pyramid that was beginning to collapse with some nostalgia in his eyes. This was the supreme staircase that he used to climb to the deity position. Then let's get ready to leave. The battle in Washington should be over soon. Caesar looked toward the western horizon with Qin in his arms. At this moment, a faint whining sound entered his ears. Only then did he remember that there was still someone in the altar hall. "Charles, I almost forgot about you." Caesar smiled and walked toward the stone bed with Qin. Charles was too tired to complain about this. He lay on the stone bed that was already on the verge of collapse like a dog. Apocalypse followed Caesar's footsteps, but he was soon stopped by Lady Storm's word of the three horsemen. "Lord Apocalypse." Tian Chi stopped in his tracks and slowly turned around. He straightened his back and looked at the three archangels with an expressionless face. "I'm no longer Master Tian Chi. I'm just an old servant of young Master Caesar. Remember that." "Lord Tian Chi, what should we do in the future?" Lady Stormsword's eyes widened. It was Apocalypse who had changed her life. In her heart, Apocalypse was always a high and mighty god. The Archangel and Spirit Butterfly were silent. They were both homeless people, mutants who were rejected by ordinary people. "I'm no longer Master Apocalypse, and you're no longer knights. Go where you should go. You can do whatever you want in the future." With that, Tian Chi turned around and walked toward the stone bed where Caesar was. "Lord Apocalypse." Lady Stormsword's eyes were filled with tears. She wanted to follow, but she was stopped by Spirit Butterfly. She turned back to look at the Spirit Butterfly, but the Spirit Butterfly shook its head at her, indicating that she should not go forward. "He's no longer the Master Tian Chi we know. His divine position, wildness, self-esteem, and everything else has been destroyed." The Archangel snorted and flapped its steel wings. It flew out of the pyramid, leaving a whirlwind behind. "Yes. It's up to us to choose our own path in the future." Spirit Butterfly held Lady Stormsword's arm and sighed. "Lord Tian Chi." Lady Stormsword stared at Tian Chi's back in a daze. Hearing Spirit Butterfly's words, she suddenly remembered that she used to steal to support an orphanage. It seemed that she was not homeless. After Caesar untied Charles, Charles got up from the stone bed and looked at Tian Chi with a complicated expression. Then, he looked at Caesar and sighed. "You're really something." His telepathy was also powerless in front of Tian Chi, and no one would believe that he could enslave such a powerful being like Tian Chi. But this was Superman Caesar. No one knew how strong he was. Miracles were as simple as eating a meal in his hands. Charles looked around and saw that the three horsemen had left. They were the only ones on the shaking pyramid. He couldn't help but ask, "Where are Hank and Logan?" "They're at the White House in Washington," fighting with Eric and the sentinels he controls. Now, the battle over there should be almost over. Caesar knew about this. When he came to New York, Jean had already sensed it. Charles hurriedly said, "Then what are we waiting for? Let's go to Washington. He doesn't want to see anything happen to Magneto or the X-Men team." Tian-Chi. Caesar gave Tian-Chi a look. "Understood, young master." Tian-Chi immediately raised his left hand and used his teleportation ability to summon a teleportation door with a purple light source in the pyramid's altar hall. Caesar took Jean's hand and stepped in first. Charles followed closely behind, and Tian-Chi was the last. Not long after everyone left, this pyramid that had only appeared in the center of New York for less than half an hour, like a miracle, continued to collapse due to the earthquake until it formed a strange crater with a radius of about 500 meters, as if it was left behind by a meteorite crashing into the ground. This battle was also known as the Battle of Gods. It even became a rare tourist destination in New York City. Of course, this was all in the future. The former site of the White House in Washington. Why was it the former site? Because with the former site of the White House as the center, the area with a radius of 100 meters seemed to have been baptized by war and had long been changed beyond recognition. Only sporadic white bricks and tiles were left of the iconic White House building. The originally green yard grass was now full of potholes. At a glance, the ground was littered with the remains of the sentinels, and thick smoke billowed into the sky. In the midst of the tragic battle. When the last sentinel fell, Wolverine Logan, Shapeshifter Rui One, Hank the Beast, Peter Quicksilver, Alex, Red Devil Azazo, and Nightwalker, the 7 people covered in wounds, stepped forward with determination and surrounded Magneto, who was standing alone in the ruins with the same wounds on his body. The Sentinel Corps was strong, but after all, it was an imperfect first-generation Sentinel with no learning and evolution function. In front of Logan, Alex, Quicksilver, and other powerful members from the future, they were defeated and destroyed one by one. "Eric, it's time to end this." Rui One picked up a special pistol and aimed it at Magneto. Magneto's helmet was broken in half, and he covered his wounded left abdomen, looked at the surrounding X-Men members, and said coldly, "When it's over, it's up to me." "Uncle, there should be a limit to your stubbornness." Quicksilver sighed. Because of a guess in his heart, he really didn't want to push Magneto to the end. "Boy, what do you know? All of you come together. If you want to win, only one side will completely fall." Magneto stood proudly, raised his hands, and all the metal objects around him floated in defiance of gravity. The X-Men members' bodies were tense, and at the next moment when the battle began, "Stop, just give me face." A familiar voice from among them made everyone on the field, including Magneto, suddenly stop. Looking at the source of the sound, a purple portal could be seen, just in the area between the two sides. Chapter 569. Inside the purple portal. Caesar pulled Jean and stepped out. His appearance made Magneto's expression change and his hands drooped down slightly. The members of the X-Men looked at him in surprise and blurted out, "What the hell is this?" "Teacher Caesar." "Young master." "Caesar. It's all settled on my side. Why haven't you guys finished yet?" Caesar glanced at them and said angrily. "Settled? Settled what?" Everyone was stunned when they heard this. Only Magneto's face was solemn as he muttered to himself, "Could it be?" Without waiting for Caesar's response, another figure stepped out of the purple portal. The members of the X-Men subconsciously looked over and were pleasantly surprised in the next second. The one who walked out was Charles, who was taken away by Apocalypse. Charles had a bald head and although his face was pale, he still looked at them spiritedly. "It's great that you guys are okay." "Charles." Rui One couldn't wait to step forward and hug him. Charles hugged her back and smiled. It's okay now. We should be the ones asking you this, Professor." Hank, who had turned into his beast form, smiled bitterly and the others nodded in agreement. They had been worried about Charles's safety for the past 2 days, fearing that Apocalypse would really take away his ability and life. It must be Teacher Caesar who rescued Professor Charles. Alex laughed. He didn't even need to look to guess that Caesar was probably the only person in this world who could successfully rescue Charles from the apocalypse. Wait. Professor Charles, Teacher Caesar, where is Apocalypse? Hank asked the question in everyone's mind, which was what Magneto wanted to know. He stared closely at the purple portal that Caesar and others walked out of. He couldn't remember wrongly, the mutant with this portal ability was Apocalypse? Behind. Caesar pointed at the portal behind him. Everyone thought that he was joking, but as a foot stretched out, a thin old servant in simple clothes walked out of the portal. He is. The members of X-Men frowned as they couldn't recognize who the old servant was. They only felt a sense of familiarity with him. The old servant stopped behind Caesar and waved at the purple portal. The portal immediately disappeared from the ground. Magneto Eric tried to call out, "Master Apocalypse?" Apocalypse raised her eyes slightly and nodded at Magneto. She whispered weakly, "I am no longer Master Apocalypse." "He's Apocalypse?" The members of the X-Men were taken aback at first, then they took a deep breath, their bodies tensed into a state of readiness, and nervously warned Caesar, "Teacher Caesar, come here, that person is very dangerous." Tian-Chi had almost destroyed the world, so how could it not be dangerous? But Caesar was unmoved, and Jean next to him also rolled her eyes. Charles patted Ruiwan on the shoulder and asked her to let go, and then explained to everyone, "Don't worry." Now Apocalypse has followed Caesar. Apocalypse has become Teacher Caesar's subordinate? The X-Men were a little dumbfounded, their mouths were dry, and they couldn't speak. This is too exaggerated. They could expect that Caesar would rescue Charles from Apocalypse, but they never thought that he would be able to take Apocalypse as his subordinate. That's a powerful existence close to God. Sure enough, you are the strongest. Magneto looked at Caesar, who was surrounded by the crowd, and whispered to himself. Eric. At this point, do you still want to continue? Charles, along with X-Men and others, looked at Magneto standing alone. Why not? I never fought for Apocalypse, but for the faith of mutants in my heart. Magneto took a deep breath. Even in the face of the X-Men team, the newly returned Charles, Caesar, Apocalypse, and others, he still stubbornly raised his hands and manipulated the metal objects around him to float. Even if he was alone against the whole world, the faith in his heart would not be shaken. Because he is Magneto. Enough, Eric. Charles narrowed his eyes and stared at him. I know you very well. You did it on purpose. After learning about Apocalypse's sacrifice plan, you deliberately caused a riot in New York so that the people in the central city could evacuate. Then you came to Washington, seemingly attacking the White House, but in fact, you just wanted to lure Hank and Ruiwan over. Why would I do that? Magneto was expressionless. Charles continued, because you know Apocalypse's strength very well. Even if the entire X-Men team went to save me, most of them would not return, so you want to be the villain yourself to delay the X-Men team. He paused and said, even if you are alone, you have fought for us in the dark. Stupid. Magneto snorted coldly and lifted the magnetic field, and the metal objects floating at a low altitude around him fell down one after another. Just give face to Caesar, we have plenty of time in the future. Magneto turned around and was about to leave. At this moment, military vehicles and armed tanks surrounded the crowd from the roads in the outside area, and there were also traces of many fighters and helicopters in the sky. Look, these are the people you are protecting. No matter what, even if you saved their lives, they still regard you as an alien. Magneto looked at the approaching army with hatred and said in a low voice, just because we have blood that is completely different from theirs. After dropping this sentence, Magneto's body floated up and flew away at top speed. Quicksilver watched Magneto leave, but in the end, he didn't call out, "Father." He looked at the US Army that surrounded this side, then looked at the others, and asked, "Should we withdraw too?" Charles shook his head and said, "If we want to leave, no one can stop us. But as Eric said, we have been evading for long enough, and it is not a solution to continue evading. If they want to fight, then let's fight." The crowd did not speak, and they stood quietly in place to express their attitude. Until the military vehicles and tanks stopped at the edge of the battlefield area. A group of fully armed soldiers got out of the car, hundreds and thousands of them, holding special firearms, surrounded them one by one. More than a dozen military helicopters lowered their altitude and stood still 50 meters above the old White House site. Just when everyone thought a battle was inevitable, a bulletproof car suddenly drove into the area from the periphery. After the door opened, the president in a suit and a group of lawmakers and officers got out of the car. "Put down your weapons." The current president raised his left hand and asked the soldiers to disarm, then looked at Caesar and the others and stepped forward with the lawmakers and officers. "All, bow." After coming close, the current president shouted, and he himself, as well as everyone who followed him, bowed to the X-Men team at a standard 90 degrees. "From my personal standpoint, I would like to offer you the highest respect." Chapter 570. Washington, on the ruins of the original site of the White House. A group of officials and generals with the highest power and military power in the United States collectively bowed to Charles and other mutants to thank them. This scene not only shocked the surrounding armed soldiers, but it is also bound to become a strong mark in history that cannot be erased. The current president raised his head with a look of shame on his face and said in a deep voice, "I didn't expect it. One day, the biggest threat comes from the weapons we made, and the ones who saved our lives were the mutants that we were originally afraid of." The Sentinel creator, Trask, was still bowing. The Sentinels that he was so proud of had become a weapon that threatened the world. Now, not only were they saved by the mutated humans that he originally hated, the Sentinels that he created were also destroyed by the mutated humans. He no longer had any reason to continue the Sentinel project. The current president glanced at him and continued to speak to Caesar and the others, "I can't announce to the public that I approve of the mutated humans as the president. After all, there is still a long way to go before the mutated humans and ordinary humans can truly coexist without any grudges. But I am willing to do my best to build a bridge of friendship between mutants and ordinary people." He paused and said seriously, "Starting today, I will strictly prohibit the development of weapons against mutants, including Sentinels, and prohibit the military and certain underground places from arresting, abusing, discriminating, etc. Mutants in society will not be treated differently. I want to." "Trask, you should have no objections, right?" the current president asked. "No." Trask shook his head, looked up at the members of X-Men in front of him, and whispered, "I'm sorry for everything I did before. From now on, the Sentinel project will be terminated indefinitely." X-Men and others collectively looked at Logan among them. Everyone knows that Logan came with the mission of saving the future world, and he exists in the present time and space for this moment. Even someone as determined as Logan couldn't help but tremble slightly at this moment. He breathed out the breath he had been holding in his chest and muttered to himself, "Sentinel, is this doomsday nightmare finally coming to an end?" "Logan." Caesar walked over and patted him on the shoulder to comfort him. The current president continued, "I will also hold meetings with the senators in the future. I hope to enact relevant laws to protect the rights of the mutated humans, so that they can stand under the same blue sky as ordinary people, and give them opportunities and platforms to display their talents. I can't guarantee that everything will be achieved perfectly, but you have fought for us, and we should fight for you once." "This is great." Hank and others were moved and couldn't hide their excitement. How many mutants in the world are waiting for this day? He could show his true self openly under the sun, instead of hiding in the dark and wearing a fake mask to hide his true appearance. After the current president expressed his wishes, he left with a group of senators and generals. The surrounding soldiers also retreated one after another, leaving the ruins of the White House to them for the time being. It's finally over. The members of the X-Men breathed a sigh of relief when Logan suddenly fell to the ground, curled up into a ball and twitched. Hank, Roy, and others quickly helped him up. Logan, what's wrong with you? Charles used his mind to calm Logan, who was in a state of confusion, and asked nervously. I'm fine. Pixie can't hold on anymore, and I have completed my mission. My consciousness, which is temporarily in this body, should go back to the future where I originally lived. Logan's face was distorted by severe pain, and he clenched his fists tightly, and his steel claws stretched out involuntarily. He suddenly remembered a very important message, and his eyes eagerly turned to Caesar and Jean next to him, and he struggled to spit out intermittent words. Yes, Caesar, remember. Xiaofan Jean. Before he could finish his sentence, Logan seemed to be unable to bear the severe pain in his brain, and his eyes closed as he fainted and fell into the arms of the beast Hank. Although his breathing was even and there was no major problem, his aura had reversed. Xiaofan Jean. Caesar frowned, and no one knew what he was thinking, but he did not let go of Jean's small hand. Jean lowered her eyes, and no one knew what she was thinking, but she also held his fingers tightly, unwilling to let go. Logan, he went back. Charles sat in a wheelchair made of stone, looked around at the others and said, we should go back too. Go back where? Professor, the school has been destroyed. I accidentally destroyed it. Alex said apologetically. Charles smiled and said, it's okay, the school is gone, but we can build a new one. As long as you are here, anywhere is home. Professor, Hank, Alex, Nightwalker, and other young men were almost moved to tears. Roy chuckled and reminded them, didn't you hear his intentions? Charles is letting us do the hard work, and we can save the labor cost of building the school. Yes. Last time, the basement of the teaching building was built by me alone. Hank smiled bitterly and glanced at Quicksilver, Alex, and others. Fortunately, there are enough people to help this time. Just keep up with my pace. Quicksilver swept away the depression in his heart and said arrogantly. The members of the X-Men were happy and harmonious, and they really looked like a big family. Azazo came in front of Caesar and looked at the weather behind him. He wanted to say something but hesitated. Young master. Caesar smiled and said, I understand. You go with them, and you don't have to follow me anymore. Chapter 571. In the correct Marvel Universe. In the office on the top floor of the unnatural building. Caesar, who was sitting in the office chair, slowly opened his eyes. The fire in his golden pupils flickered as if a burning flame was ignited, but it quickly extinguished and dimmed without a trace. Boss, how is it? Yutong pushed open the door from outside the corridor and entered, holding a cup of steaming hot coffee in her hand. Her suit and skirt wrapped around her charming and graceful body. Her graceful catwalk showed her amorous feelings. Well, how should I put it? Caesar was still frowning and thinking. He subconsciously took Yutong into his arms. While feeling the amazing warmth of the beauty's body, he bowed his head and took a sip of the coffee she was holding. The tiredness on his handsome face disappeared a little. Caesar pondered and said, my avatar Caesar and I are like two mobile phones in a desolate area. Although we can't really connect, the signal between us still exists vaguely. Just now, I perceived the existence of a little girl's consciousness in his spiritual world. The other party called Caesar teacher, which proves that the avatar's current situation shouldn't be too bad. Yutong chuckled, bowed her head to take a sip of coffee, and said softly, you underestimate your Superman avatar too much, don't you? With his strength, it's already very good that he didn't cause trouble for others. That's true. Caesar shrugged. Instead of worrying about his avatar, it's better to stabilize the current world first. Since the Battle of New York, the current Earth is completely exposed to the alien forces. But this is also good. The sense of crisis can spur the progress of others and make S.H.E.L.D. and the Avengers move, so that they don't think that they can live a peaceful life doing nothing every day. Iron Man Tony has probably noticed the calm before the storm. During this time, no one knows what new black technology he is working on in Stark Industries. His old comrade Captain America, Steve, takes Hawkeye, Black Widow, Falcon, and others to run around and eliminate the internal disputes and hidden dangers on Earth. Perhaps they, who have experienced the battle with Hydra, know best that the greatest danger often comes from within. If they hadn't come into contact with the internal threat, how could they fight against the extraterrestrial forces? It had only been a short while since the celestial bodies had gathered. Thor was probably running back and forth from the war zone at the edge of the 9 realms to quell the large-scale wars in other realms. He did not have the time to invite him to the divine realm for a drink recently. Spider-Man Peter has just entered high school, so let his adolescence be ordinary for a while. After all, there may be no leisurely and peaceful adolescence in the future. Strange, who had been tricked by him, was not chased out by the Ancient One. It seemed that he was already learning magic, and a core powerhouse who would protect Earth in the future was about to be born. The second-generation Ant-Man Scott also successfully received the inheritance from the first-generation Ant-Man. Everything is falling into place. Loki, Thanos. Caesar muttered these 2 words in his mind. The former was still manageable, as they had only obtained the Tesseract, which had lost its core, and the Gem of Reality, so they could only hide behind his back and play tricks. The most troublesome was the latter, as the other party had sent people to capture Lorna, and both of them were collecting Infinity Stones. Since this matter had a beginning, it would eventually enter the white-hot stage. Boss, boss. While Caesar was in a daze, Yutong called him a few times in a row, and only then did he wake up. I was distracted just now. Tell me, what's the matter? It's like this. Just now, Logan sent me a message. Yutong's face became serious. Logan. Caesar couldn't help but laugh. Didn't he go to Asia for a vacation? Yutong nodded and said, yes. But the message he sent me was a secret message exclusive to the family. Oh? A look of surprise appeared in Caesar's eyes. Using a secret message meant that Logan's situation wasn't very good, and that someone was monitoring him. Who on earth would be so bold? What did he say? Caesar asked. Yutong looked at Caesar strangely and said, he asked you to go to Japan in Asia. Japan? Caesar was stunned. The name of this country was familiar, but he hadn't heard of it in a long time. Now that he heard it, he could faintly smell the blood and smoke from back then. Caesar tucked Yutong's black hair behind her ear and said, speaking of which. Yutong, you were also born there. Yes. Without Boss, I would have died long ago. Yutong's tone was emotionless. How could she forget what happened when she was young? It was just that she had already cut off all ties with that matter, and she didn't have any hatred or resentment left. Who would harbor hatred for an ant that they looked down on? Since it was Logan who asked. Caesar touched his chin and immediately decided. Then let's get ready. We'll set off for Japan in Asia. Okay. Yutong nodded without hesitation. As long as she was with Caesar, she could go anywhere. Who are we bringing along? Venom, toxins, or hellfire? Yutong tilted her head and put her fingertips under her red lips. She asked innocently and elegantly. It's not like we're going to destroy a country. Why would we bring them along? Caesar shook his head and looked around. He said in surprise, wait, where's Vice? Where did that guy run off to? Yutong replied, Jarvis asked him to go. Those two are artificial intelligences. I don't know what they're researching with Tawny. Then forget it. Just the two of us will go. I don't think there's anything important to deal with anyway. Oh right, bring that thing. Caesar said. Chapter 572. Japan, Nissan Country. This was an island country located in Eastern Asia, bordering the Pacific Ocean. Originally, the old Tokyo city was the center of economy and power. However, due to the nuclear explosion at the end of World War II, the old Tokyo city suffered heavy casualties, and the serious radiation pollution destroyed the foundation of the earth, turning part of the Kyoto area into a dead land with no survivors. After the surrender of World War II, Nissan's surviving high-ranking officials were forced to move the original town of the old Tokyo city to the direction of Mount Fuji for nearly 50 kilometers. Next to the sacred mountain, they built a new national capital from almost nothing. This was the new Tokyo city at that time. Now, in the blink of an eye, 70 years have passed in a hurry. This new Tokyo city was not contaminated with the smoke of the past. It was already a world-famous modern bustling city. Here, people were prosperous, technology was developed, and Japanese-style buildings were neatly located in the town. Cherry trees were in full bloom on the streets and streets that extended in all directions. A gentle breeze blew along the street intersection, and the cherry petals were like a dream, sprinkling on the ground like pink snow. Kale and Yutong walked side by side on the street. Kale was wearing the same casual t-shirt and jeans, but his tall and perfect figure, and his handsome face, no matter what clothes he wore, could not hide his masculine charm. Many passing local girls secretly threw flirtatious glances at him. Yutong was no longer wearing her work suit and skirt uniform. Instead, she changed into a more casual and loose white skirt. The skirt hemline reached her white legs like lotus roots. Yutong, who was wearing a cap, walked forward leisurely. Her waist-length black hair and white skirt swayed elegantly. Coupled with her impeccable beauty, she really looked like an oriental beauty who had walked out of a classical painting. Yutong also carried a slender sword on her back. There was no scabbard, only a little white cloth wrapped around the sword body, revealing the finely carved, art-like hilt. Kale and Yutong walked together. No matter who saw them, they would exclaim, "A talented man and a beautiful woman." Because of this, the local passers-by who were interested in the two of them did not go up to them too presumptuously. Of course. This was all because the local passers-by did not know the identities of Kale and Yutong. If they knew even the slightest bit, not only would they lose interest, they would also be unimaginably frightened. This place has changed a lot. Kale said calmly as he observed the modern, beautiful, and orderly appearance of the new Tokyo. After all, 70 years have passed, which is almost a century. Yutong couldn't help but laugh. She only had a little impression of the architectural style of this place. At that time, she still didn't know anything. She only knew that she was a little loli who followed Kale to kill people. 70 years. In that case, it has indeed been a long time. When I close my eyes, the events of the war are still vivid in my mind, as if I just experienced it yesterday. Kale narrowed his eyes and raised his head to look at Mount Fuji that was faintly towering into the clouds not far away. He reminisced, at that time, this was just the edge of Tokyo City. It was called Songbingyu District. It was desolate and there were few people here. A small town is located here, and there is also a sword hall of a sect called God. It's the Shinto no-thought school, right? Yutong reminded, "Boss, this has been recorded in the history books of many countries. You, the person involved and the protagonist, actually forgot about it." Who asked me to flatten too many schools and dojos at that time? Kale touched his nose. He really couldn't be blamed for this. He could only blame those dojos for not leaving a deep impression in his heart. However, this was all in the past. The human enemies he encountered in the past were probably already turned into dust by now. If this continued for a few more decades, perhaps in the future, Kale wouldn't even be able to find a single enemy who resented him. They would all disappear completely under the law of nature. The lifespan of ordinary humans is still a shortcoming. If you want to conquer the stars and the sea of the universe, evolving towards God and increasing your lifespan is the real way out. Kale shook his head gently. He had experienced too many things now, and he also had strength and influence that was not inferior to the Ancient One. After seeing through the dispute between the earth and the starry sky, he gradually understood some of the ideas of the Ancient One. As for whether to check and balance, intervene, and so on, it all needed to be carefully calculated to avoid accidentally subverting the normal operation of this world. However, he wasn't the Ancient One, and he didn't want to be the second Alpha Centauri. He was himself. As long as he followed his nature and did what he wanted to do, it would be fine. Boss. Are we going to find Logan now? Yutong asked softly. Kale pondered, there's no hurry. Since we're already here, let's walk around first and inquire about the news. I know where you want to go. Yutong smiled charmingly. She held Kale's arm with both hands and walked towards a conspicuous building. Fuji-style bar. Yutong and Kale entered the bar like foreign tourists. They each ordered a glass of red wine and brandy and sat down. In a place like a bar, there were all kinds of people. There was information circulating every minute and every second. From the people's livelihood to the national affairs. In particular, Yutong's ability was mind-reading. After taking a sip of red wine elegantly, Yutong put her hand on her tight chin. After closing her beautiful eyes, her transcendent being covered the entire bar. Many people were drunk and didn't realize that their memories, even if they were deeply buried in their hearts, were clear in front of Yutong. In just 3 seconds, Yutong's beautiful eyes flickered with silver light, and she let out a surprised and doubtful, "Huh? How is it? Is there news about Logan?" Caesar asked curiously. "No." Yutong shook her head and frowned, "There's a strange rumor." "Tell me about it." "These few days. Many people found an eagle near Mount Fuji." "Eagle? What's so strange about that?" "Eagles are not extinct animals. It's normal for them to appear in Mount Fuji." Kale didn't know whether to laugh or cry. When did Nissan become so fussy? Yutong stared at him and said, "But that eagle is not an ordinary eagle. Its physique is not inferior to a small fighter jet. Most importantly, its feathers are blue." "Oh?" Kale's pupils shrank slightly. "A big blue eagle?" He suddenly remembered the distant past. The blue eagle attracted the pursuing Japanese fighter jets and resolutely rushed to the sky in the opposite direction. That was the last time he saw the blue eagle. Later, his master-servant connection with the blue eagle was completely severed. It had been 70 years. It couldn't be it. Kale picked up the wine glass, raised his head, and took a big gulp. He whispered, "There's more." Yutong looked more solemn this time. She said, "Recently, aftershocks have been frequent in the Mount Fuji mountain range. There's news that the research team found a giant egg suspected to be laid by a dinosaur deep underground." Pfft! Kale almost spat out the wine in his mouth when he heard that. Chapter 573. Dynamic electronic music flowed and reverberated in the large bar. Young and beautiful men and women danced to the melody in the ballroom. Their bodies became more and more passionate and indulgent under the friction of their bodies. Their passion and sweat constantly sprinkled on the colorful floor. In a dark corner of the bar, Kale picked up the glass and drank a big mouthful of wine. He let the spicy wine stimulate his tongue, but at this time, his heart was obviously more scorching than the music and wine. What Yutong found out, a blue eagle and a giant egg, which evoked his memory of fighting and killing in this land. The Blue Eagle did not return in that war. It had been 70 years, and he still had not connected the subtle connection in his heart. What was the connection between the Blue Eagle that appeared in Nissan and the Blue Eagle that had once fought with him on the battlefield? In addition, was that giant egg the strange egg that the system had drawn when he buried it under the hot spring at the bottom of the mountain? If it was, 70 years had passed and it had not hatched. This egg was really a trap dug by the card drawing system. Kale drank and thought about it. At this time, at the door of the bar, a handsome young man in a suit stepped in. He was holding two beautiful Nissan women in his left and right hands, and behind him were 3 or 4 bodyguards with tattoos on their arms. The manager of the bar was a burly man who had been waiting at the door for a long time. When he saw the young man enter, he greeted him with a warm smile. "Young Master Sakai, I haven't seen you for a long time. How is your father?" "Cut the crap. Do you have any good beauties around here recently?" Sakai did not stop and continued to walk to the bar hall. "There are some, but no matter how good they are, they can't compare to the resources around you, Master Itai." Not only was the bar owner not angry, but he smiled even more brilliantly. He quickly walked beside Sakai and glared fiercely at the sight of Sakai hugging a beauty's chest. "No, it's boring. Why don't we go back?" Sakai coldly glanced at the bar owner. The bar owner was a strong man with a height of 189 meters, but under the gaze of the gentle young man in front of him, his body trembled uncomfortably. He thought for a moment, then leaned closer and whispered, "Young Master Sakai, the girls that have come to the shop recently don't match your high taste. It's just that a pair of foreigners just came to the bar. The female companion is not only the most beautiful I have ever seen in my life, but her figure is also the best. If you want, I'll find a way to get it for you." Speaking of this, the bar owner's eyes were full of pain and regret. He originally wanted to taste it himself, but unfortunately, he met Sakai, this playboy. "Oh? The best?" Sakai walked forward doubtfully. As soon as he stepped into the hall, he saw Kyle and Yutong sitting in the corner of the hall at a glance without the boss pointing it out. Kale could only see the back, but Yutong could see the side of her face. However, just by looking at the side of her face, Sakai's eyes were full of splendor. He could be considered to have seen countless women, but it was the first time he had seen an oriental beauty like Yutong, who could be said to be stunning. Her appearance and figure were flawless. "She's mine." Sakai exerted force with his 5 fingers, grabbing the hands of the 2 girls beside him until they were in incomparable pain, but the girls did not even dare to make a sound. "Yes." The bar owner could not hide his regret. He could only meet such a beautiful woman once in his life. "Wait," Sakai Harahara's squinting eyes suddenly became sluggish when his line of sight moved to the sword that Yutong carried with her. "What's wrong?" The bar owner looked at him in surprise. Sakai stared at Yutong's sword. The blade was wrapped in cloth, but the ancient patterns on the hilt could be seen clearly under the colorful lights. "That sword, it's so familiar. I think I've seen it somewhere before." "Right, in my grandfather's library." "That sword is," Sakai's face instantly turned deathly pale. Thinking of the sword's name, the tall back of the male companion beside the top-grade oriental beauty also became familiar. It was so familiar that his body began to tremble instinctively. A kind of fear arose. It seemed to come from the deepest part of his genes, and it instantly broke down all the defenses of his body and mind. "Master?" The 2 girls supported Sakai with some difficulty. They felt that Sakai's body was as limp as a pile of mud at this moment. "Let's go." Sakai's teeth chattered as he squeezed out this word from between his teeth. "Master Sakai?" The bar owner and his bodyguards were stunned. "I said go, get out. Get out of here. Didn't you hear me?" Sakai shouted in exasperation. His voice was very low, and there was a trace of crying. Yes. Go now. The 4 bodyguards hurried to protect Sakai, while the bar owner and the girls supported him. The group of people came aggressively, but retreated halfway through the bar door. After leaving the bar, the group got into the car and drove for 10 kilometers. Sakai's anxiety and fear eased a little, but his hands and feet were still trembling. When he regained the strength to speak and move, he grabbed the bar owner's sleeve and shouted angrily, "You bastard, are you trying to kill me? I really don't know what happened, Master Sakai." The bar owner was on the verge of tears. His face was filled with confusion. Sakai's family had connections with both the legal and illegal forces, and they had great influence in Japan. Even if it was the Emperor of Nissan or the Prime Minister, Sakai dared to claim relatives. Many popular female stars were ruined in his hands. Today, the bar owner saw Sakai for the first time, as if he saw the Grim Reaper. "That sword is Murasame, Murasame." Sakai shouted crazily. "That's Murasame?" The bar owner was stunned, and then the bodyguards and the girls in the car all took a breath with him. The driver was so uneasy that he almost had a car accident. Murasame. Nissan's historical famous sword, known as the Demon Sword. Many ancient sects kept it as a sheathed sword and passed it down from generation to generation. Until the end of World War II, this famous sword was lost from the Shinto thoughtless school. The later owner of this sword was Kale, the Major General of the American Empire. This was the modern history that even elementary school students knew, and it was also the witness of Nissan's shame. So, the man in the bar just now, that man is, the bar owner's eyes were full of fear, and he didn't dare to continue. Just thinking about it made him suffocated and difficult to breathe. The man's name was the taboo of taboos in Nissan. In the records of many history books, the author didn't even dare to record the man's name, and only dared to describe him as Black Devil, Major General of the American Empire, and so on. If you say, what was the most feared thing in Nissan? Before World War II, there were paper men, ghosts, yiksha, and so on. After World War II, there was only the taboo name left. The legendary man, with his own strength, almost destroyed their proud and complacent country. Sakai laughed nervously and whispered to himself in fear, he's back again." Chapter 574. After spending half an hour digesting the news that the man was coming to Nissan, Sakai and his men in Nissan finally calmed down. "Master Sakai, what are you going to do?" The bar owner's mouth was dry. He swallowed and looked at Sakai, who was much stronger than him in terms of status, connections, and financial resources. It was said that if the sky fell, the tall man would hold it up. But the man's arrival was not as simple as the sky falling. Even the earth was about to collapse. Nissan was going to change completely. "What else can we do?" Sakai smiled bitterly. His left hand clenched his right fist tightly. He said forcefully, "I'm going home now. Tell my grandfather and father that we can't handle this. Even my elders can't intervene. We have to keep sending this message to the higher-ups." "I understand." The bar owner nodded solemnly. Although he didn't have connections, he could still send messages to powerful people. The bodyguards looked at each other and hesitated. Finally, one of them braced himself and said, "Master Sakai, we want to take leave. Just 1 or 2 days." Sakai glanced at the bodyguard coldly, and the bodyguard lowered his head guiltily. Sakai snorted coldly and said, "I don't even need to think to know that you're asking for leave. You're obviously trying to book plane tickets to take refuge abroad, right? We wouldn't dare." The bodyguards kept quiet out of fear. "Humph." Sakai didn't say anything. Not to mention the bodyguards, even his first thought was to leave Nissan to avoid disaster. Yes. That man's existence was 100 times more terrifying than a natural disaster to Nissan. At least natural disasters could be overcome with technology and manpower. But that man was undefeatable. You're not allowed to leave. I'll kill whoever leaks the news. Sakai calmed down and said, "Don't be so anxious. That man's arrival in Nissan is undoubtedly a disaster, but it's also a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think he's in Nissan." From unarmed children and old people to powerful generals and prime ministers, all of them wanted to kill that man and be done with it. That man has suppressed our country for 70 years. As long as he exists, we can't wipe away the shame and repair the broken samurai pillar. In front of the whole world, we'll never be able to stand up and raise our heads. Sakai's words moved the bar owner, the bodyguards, and the waitress. "Master Sakai, we're not leaving," the bodyguards said in unison. "Young Master Sakai, you're the one with the awareness." The bar owner was ashamed. Right now, our country is strong and prosperous, and our technology has advanced by leaps and bounds. It's not something that could be compared to a century ago. I don't believe that a country will always be suppressed by that man. After young Master Sakai finished his sentence, he snapped his fingers and instructed the driver, "Turn around, let's go back. Back to the center of the city." "Yes." The extended version of the Black Bridge car ignored the traffic rules on the road. It turned around and headed back to the bustling city built by Mount Fuji. Inside the Fuji-style bar. "Boss, someone seemed to have seen through our identity. Do you want me to go out and deal with it?" Yutong's slender legs were closed together. With a wine glass in her hand, she leaned toward Kale and opened her sweet lips. Even when talking about killing people, she was emotionless. A pair of dark beautiful eyes looked at Kale affectionately. "No need. It's only a matter of time before we're recognized. Just do our own thing." Kale shook his head indifferently. Even if he knew that this would trigger the hostility of this land, he still didn't care. This was the principle of the strong. Would a falcon soaring in the blue sky care about the hostility of an ant nest on the ground? No, not to mention the sun hanging high in the sky. "Pay up. Let's go." Kale stood up from his seat and walked out of the bar. "Boss, where are we going?" Yutong asked from behind. Kale replied calmly, "Mount Fuji." Mount Fuji. The first mountain in Nissan, commonly known as the Holy Mountain, was an active volcano 3 or 4 kilometers above sea level. It was not winter yet. Even so, the cherry blossoms at the foot of Mount Fuji were blooming. But from the mountainside, the number of trees decreased sharply. The top of the mountain was covered with snow for a long time. It was white and towered into the clouds. Kale and Yutong were like two tourists, walking in the scenic area at the foot of Mount Fuji. There were many locals who came to see the cherry blossoms. When they saw the two of them, they just looked at them a few more times and didn't have much other expression. 70 years had passed since World War II. Not everyone could recognize Kale. After all, Nissan kept Kale's information closed. Photos, videos, and even news reports were prohibited from flowing into the country, so as not to cause social panic. Some people thought that the Murasame on Yutong's back was an anime heroine. The local otaku also wanted to take a photo with them. But when they saw Kale next to her, they gave up the idea and only dared to take 1 or 2 photos from a distance. This place hasn't changed much. Kale looked at the magnificent mountain in front of him and commented. If the mountain has changed, it would be too exaggerated. Yutong stuck out her pink tongue. As soon as her voice fell, the ground suddenly shook violently, causing the cherry blossoms in the surrounding blooming cherry trees to fall down like snow. This is... Kale narrowed his eyes and looked at somewhere in Mount Fuji. He felt a familiar and powerful breath coming to him. Then, under the horrified gaze of countless people, Mount Fuji spewed out red lava from the top of the mountain with a boom. Accompanied by thick smoke, it rushed straight to the blue sky. The earthquake followed the premonition and broke out one after another. The volcano erupted. Earthquake. The tourists and pedestrians in the scenic area at the foot of the mountain screamed again and again. They didn't care about anything and fled crazily in the direction of the mountain. Kale and Yutong stood still, looked at each other, and rose into the sky from the crowd. They flew toward the epicenter of Mount Fuji one after another. Mount Fuji was usually like a dignified and quiet queen. At this time, she was like an evil woman in a state of rage. She spewed hot red lava into the sky, and the mountain shook and kept throwing down hot rolling stones. There was nothing unusual on the front of Mount Fuji. Kale and Yutong bypassed the crater and came to the back of the mountain. Just a glance made their eyes shine. They saw a huge hole on the back of Mount Fuji, which was 50 meters in length and width. The hole went straight to the inside of the mountain. This hole was like a monster's hole. Outside the hole, there were giant footprints along the mountain. The footprints were enough to fill a car easily. The footprints left by these unknown monsters extended all the way to the sea until they disappeared at the end of the line of sight. Could it be that the egg hatched? Yutong followed Kale, floating in the air and muttering to herself. It should be. Kale was a little confused. What kind of thing was hatched from the egg? The collapse of the mountain and the crack of the earth was bigger than his card. Chapter 575. Mount Fuji has erupted with lava for the first time in decades. Volcanic activity is obvious. There have been continuous earthquakes of magnitude 6 or 7 in the Tokyo area. Many people have evacuated from Tokyo City. A huge hole appeared on the back of Mount Fuji, as well as a series of footprints of giant beasts. Witnesses at the scene said that they saw a tall, lizard-like Tyrannosaurus Rex standing on 2 legs. It broke out of the mountain and left in the direction of the sea. First, it was the mysterious blue eagle creature that was previously tracked. Now, it's a 50-meter-tall wild beast? This creature, nicknamed Godzilla and suspected to be from ancient times, has awakened from its egg. Tens of millions of years ago, it might have been the ruler of this land. Now that it has made a comeback, how should humans deal with it? Media reporters were the least afraid of trouble. This situation was the same no matter which country they were in. Therefore, the sudden incident that had just broken out in the morning had spread throughout most of Nissan through the internet and multimedia channels in the afternoon. Moreover, this incident did not need to be exaggerated. As long as it was reported truthfully, it was enough to sell the report. So the true enemy of humans is not outer space, but the creatures of the old world? This question, which was related to philosophy and reality, continued to cause concern and heated discussion among the people of Nissan. At the same time, a photo quietly spread on Nissan's online forum. It was a secretly taken photo of Kale and Yutong walking side by side. The focus was on Yutong. Kale only took a blurry side profile. At first, it was just an otaku who posted it on the exchange forum. However, it quickly attracted the attention and doubts of many readers. Although this photo is a little blurry and from a distance, the lady with the cloth sword on her back is really beautiful. I feel the same. She's beautiful, natural, and not pretentious. She really looks like a modern heroine who walked out of a painting. 5 seconds. I want all her information. You're too late. I have 3 seconds. Originally, the discussions on the internet were very normal, until, the lady is beautiful, but did no one notice the foreign young man beside her? I noticed. He's clearly very handsome, but why does my heart palpitate uneasily when I only see his side profile? Me too. When I saw him, I had goosebumps all over my body. It was as if I had seen something scarier than a poisonous snake. Is there something wrong with this picture? No one recognized him? Even if you haven't surfed the internet, you should at least have read history. He looks like that man. If he's the real deal, then we really can't stay in Tokyo anymore. Is that man scarier than Godzilla? Huh, ignorant. Tokyo, Prime Minister's residence, conference hall. Nissan's current Prime Minister, who was slightly shorter and had a big belly, slammed his phone on the table. His face was red as he scolded, "Why? Even the people are about to know that he's here, but we, who are in high positions, have only just found out. What are those useless people from the National Defense Department doing?" A group of Nissan politicians in suits lowered their heads submissively, not knowing what to say. "Our country's biggest enemy has come to our country. He's going in and out of bars, strolling on the streets and scenic spots, but the security police didn't report it. This is too shameful." The current Prime Minister scolded, slammed the table and growled, "Did those useless people only react when the other party put a knife to my neck?" General Fui coughed and reminded him, "Prime Minister, the most important thing now is how to deal with this matter. The previous generations couldn't solve it. What should we do if we leave it to our generation?" The Prime Minister slumped in his chair. After a moment of silence, he ordered coldly, "First, ban all photos and information about that man's arrival in Nissan from all the forums on the internet. Move the armed forces from the nearby military bases and station them in Tokyo City." "Prime Minister, are you preparing for war?" General Fui's pupils contracted violently. The other politicians were also surprised and doubtful. It wasn't that they didn't have guts. It was just that their guts and warrior spirit had been trampled into a mess by that man 70 years ago. The current Prime Minister narrowed his eyes dangerously and shouted, "What are you afraid of? After all, today is different from the past. Also, that man doesn't belong to the US military now. Even if he doesn't age, I don't believe that an old general from the past era will be strong forever, strong enough to ignore the current superpowers." He paused and sneered, that man was indeed powerful back then. But to say that he forced the Nissan government's top officials to be unable to fight back is too much of an exaggeration. No matter what, he was only the first special human to develop his genes and obtain superpowers. Now, our country's fighting machines, non-human species, and kendo masters are endless. After the current Prime Minister said this, General Fui and the other politicians' pale faces regained a little color. Indeed, times were different. The enemy that couldn't be defeated in the past might not be defeated now. General Fui pondered and said, "Prime Minister, if you let the military force enter Tokyo so quickly, I'm afraid it will cause panic and suspicion among the people." "What's wrong with that?" The current Prime Minister smiled and said, "Wasn't there a rumor recently about the so-called Blue Eagle and Godzilla? As long as we use the name of eliminating unknown monsters to enter the armed forces, it will be fine." "Understood." General Fui nodded in realization. "That's right." The current Prime Minister seemed to have thought of something and ordered, "Send the information about the Black Demon coming to Nissan to the families and forces in Nissan. Go now." "Yes." General Fui took the order and left. The current Prime Minister clenched his fists and his eyes flashed with a cold light. If he had been in the US territory, we wouldn't have been able to do anything about him. He's really arrogant. Since he's here, don't even think about leaving. Nightfall. Due to the frequent strange events recently, some people left Tokyo to travel, while most people hid at home and didn't go out, causing the streets of Tokyo to be far less lively than usual. Kale and Yutong walked side by side. After leaving the downtown area, they came to a dark and remote intersection. "Come out." Kale faced the empty intersection and said calmly. It should be said that he's worthy of being the Major General of the US Empire who dominated the battlefield of World War II. Someone laughed sinisterly in the dark. With a few whooshing sounds of the wind, 4 or 5 men in black with cat and fox masks and swords on their backs inexplicably appeared on top of the building next to the intersection. Under the moonlight, they coldly looked down at Kyle and his companion. "Ninja?" Kale muttered, afraid that these people would die later. He took the lead and asked Yutong, do they have any news about Logan? The ninjas were still confused. Yutong's eyes flashed with silver light, then she shook her head and said, no. They were ordered by the ninja organization to test us. Then kill them all. Kale's casual tone was like killing a few annoying flies. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.